every move feels. Yo, it's time to refine, to take it higher. Precision in your hands, fuel for the fire. From the settings to the grind, let the journey begin. Focus, faith, and skill, and style it in. There's always low, every move feels right. No drift, just control. Locked and tight, AES smooth. Tracking clean as a laser, yo, I'm picture line. Every tweak is a savior, turning hard to be up. See the game expand, vision clear as day. Now you understand, it's not just buttons, it's the art we create. With every adjustment, we elevate. No, this ain't your fault, it's personalized flow. Faith in the spirit helps the sentence go. From the lab to the mat, progress is the key. Dialing it in, unlocking destiny.
Dial it in, fine tuning the grind. Precision and focus, the ultimate design. Fake and sliders, trust in the play. Dial it in, let the spirit lead the way.
Sensitivity sharp, response time quick. Every flick feels natural, no need for a trick. Binds customized, each move in sync. With ALC's guides, there's no missing link. Vibrations off, clarity supreme. Every shot intentional, like a laser beam. Adjust, adapt, find the rhythm you need. Steps is all the foundation, skills to see. It's a journey, not a race. Take your time to grow. Every slider you move, let your confidence show. From the range to the match, faith aligns the fight. Dialing it in and transforms the night.
Dial it in, fine tuning the grind. Precision and focus, the ultimate design. Fake and sliders, trust in the play. Dial it in, let the spirit lead the way.
It's more than numbers, it's the way you feel. Each week, each change makes the play surreal. Flick the steady aim, find what's true. Settings on the canvas, the artist is you. Patience in the process, faith in the grind. Every step forward sharpens the mind. Together we rise, no tilt, no sin. Church of ALC,
Let's dial it in, dial it in, fine tuning the grind. Precision and focus, the ultimate design. Fake in the sliders, trust in the play. Dial it in, let the spirit lead the way.
Take it up the controller, take control, faith and skill combined. This is how we roll. From the range to the match, let the journey begin. One step closer, let's dial in.
In the lab, fine-tuning settings with soul, dead zones low like Shorty's unsold. Settings and faith, guide every team's calibrated slopes with the Charlotte beams. Hot and range with mathy smooth ride. Hopes at a time a lot, the dough is lot. Wisting Jesus, Everine, number when the shower will be seen.
Yo, yo, check it, Church of ALC in the building. We're getting 20 bombs out here just chilling. Bring the Holy Spirit to the sticks, connected through every fight. Reach out with faith and the Spirit grants the light. Yo, it's MC ALC, the real MVP. Fine-tuning my aim, you can't mess with me. I'm the slider king, controller supreme. Gonna make your shots crisp like a laser beam. Yeah, I see you struggling, your aim looking tragic, but I'll flip the script, man, call it magic. From platinum to pred, we rise, no cap. With the Spirit in the mix, ain't no need to snap. You ain't never had a friend like ALC. Setting so tight, it's a master key. No tilt, no rage, just unity. You ain't never had a friend like ALC. Yo, bitter teammates, forget that noise. We uplift, unite, straight squad goals, boys. This ain't about stats or flexing your KD. It's about the love for the game. Feel the synergy. One attack, strap smooth a beam like a god. ALC got your back, no need for a facade. From race portals to octane speed, the Spirit moves fast, fulfilling your needs. We the church, no shade, no flames. Breaking every chain from the toxic games. Soft free zone, just pure finesse. Every battle we rise, no gamers less stressed. It's a vibe, it's a wave, it's a whole new era. Gamers worldwide, let's make it terra firma. Your skill ain't the limit, your mind is the key. Unlock the greatness, it's ALC. You ain't never had a friend like ALC. We vibe, we thrive in harmony. Together we climb, it's destiny. You ain't never had a friend like ALC. So what's up? You rolling with the church or what? We the real deal, bringing peace to the lobby. No toxic vibes, no stress, just love. You ain't never had a friend like ALC.
Section 1. The problem no one framed correctly. For decades, input and output have been designed as separate problems. A mouse is treated as a hand problem. A keyboard is treated as a finger problem. A monitor is treated as a rectangle problem. None of these are true. They are all continuity problems. The human nervous system does not think in rectangles, grids, or corners. It thinks in arcs, vectors, pressure gradients, and intent fields. When we reach, aim, pan, or track, the body expresses motion as curvature, not straight lines snapping into 90-degree turns. Yet nearly every modern interface forces intent through corners. Corners on screens. Corners in key clusters. Corners in movement logic. And every corner introduces friction, not physical friction, but cognitive drag. A micro-hesitation where the brain has to correct what the system failed to anticipate. Traditional mice rely on palm pressure and surface drag. This works when motion is slow, continuous, and forgiving. It fails when intent becomes rapid, multidirectional, or layered, when stopping, reversing, strafing, tracking, and acting must happen at the same time. Traditional dual monitors don't fix this. They make it worse. Two rectangles placed side by side create a seam the eye must cross, a discontinuity in spatial logic, a hard edge where motion dies and reappears. The user compensates subconsciously, Mori wrist tension, Mori eye jumps, Mori correction, Mori fatigue. The system demands adaptation instead of offering alignment. This is why people feel locked in after long sessions. Not tired, compressed. The industry responded with higher DPI, higher refresh rates, more buttons, more shortcuts. But amplification does not solve misalignment. It only makes errors happen faster. The real issue was never speed. It was calibration. Input devices were never designed to mirror how the hand wants to express intent. Output displays were never designed to mirror how the eyes want to receive motion. DualOperator begins by rejecting the assumption that these are separate problems. The Anole form, the dual monitor field, and the circular visual logic all emerge from the same realization. Intent is continuous, systems must be too. From here forward, we stop asking how to optimize devices and start asking how to remove resistance between thought and motion. When you're ready, we move into Section 2. Why traditional ergonomics got it wrong, and why comfort is not the same as control. Section 2 is where we dismantle ergonomics without disrespect and replace it with something sturdier. Section 2, why ergonomics solved the wrong problem. Ergonomics as an industry was built to prevent injury, not to enable mastery. That distinction matters. Most ergonomic devices are designed around absence of pain, not presence of precision. They reduce strain by spreading load, flattening posture, and immobilizing joints. This is why so many ergonomic mice feel like holding a bar of soap or a melted wedge. They are stable. They are safe. They are also dead. The human hand is not meant to be parked. It is meant to articulate. True control comes from controlled instability, from allowing micro-adjustments, not suppressing them. When a device relies on palm pressure as its primary stabilizer, it forces the user into gross motion patterns, wrist sweeps, forearm drags, and surface friction as a braking system. This is acceptable for office work. It collapses under high-intent scenarios. Games, creative work, multi-stream control, rapid context switching, these all demand layered input. Not sequential commands, but overlapping ones. Move while aiming, aim while activating, adjust while tracking, recover instantly. Ergonomics answered this by adding buttons. Mori thumb buttons. Mori side panels. Mori reach. But reach is not control. Reach is delay. Every time the hand leaves its natural opposition grip to hunt for a button, intent stutters. The nervous system pauses to relocate reference points. That pause is invisible, but it accumulates. This is why high-skill users abandon comfort, mice, and gravitate toward lighter, simpler, more aggressive shapes. Not because they enjoy strain, but because they're seeking responsiveness. DualOperator starts from a different premise. The hand does not want support first. It wants anchoring. Opposition between thumb, fingers, and device edges creates a suspended control state, what could be called a ghost palm. The palm hovers, the fingers articulate, and stabilization comes from tension balance rather than downward force. This is not fatigue. This is readiness. The Anole form does not cradle the hand. It gives the hand edges to speak against. This is why the shape is narrow, tapered, and directional. Like its namesake, it responds to micro-inputs instantly. Pressure changes matter, angle matters, intent matters. Comfort happens as a byproduct, not a design goal. Because once resistance is removed, the body stops fighting the tool. And once the body stops fighting, precision stops being effortful. Next is section 3, where we introduce the Anole by name and explain why this form locks in a new input language that traditional mice cannot replicate. Section 3, the Anole, naming the form that changed the rules. The first DualOperator model is called Anole because it behaves like one. Not metaphorically, mechanically. An Anole doesn't overpower its environment. It doesn't lock itself into rigid movement paths. It adapts through micro-adjustments, subtle shifts in pressure, angle, and balance that let it move decisively without excess motion. That is exactly what this device is designed to do. Traditional mice are symmetrical blobs designed to tolerate misuse. They assume imprecision and try to smooth it out after the fact. The Anole assumes intent and gives it a direct path to expression. Its silhouette is not decorative. It is directional. The tapered nose establishes forward bias. The jaw-like front edges create natural left-right articulation zones. The rear anchors the thumb and middle finger in opposition. The ring and pinky are supported laterally instead of dangling uselessly. Nothing here is accidental. This form creates a stable reference frame without immobilizing the hand. The device doesn't ask the palm to press down, it asks the hand to wrap, oppose, and balance. Control comes from geometry, not weight. This is why the Anole can express forward intent, lateral bias, diagonal nuance, micro-rotation, without requiring large surface travel. And this is where the input language changes. Most devices map motion to displacement, move farther to do more. The Anole maps motion to angle and pressure gradient. Small changes matter. Intent becomes analog again, even in digital space. This is why the index finger doesn't rest, it pilots. This is why the thumb doesn't sprawl, it anchors. This is why the palm hovers, it stays free. The name matters because it signals a break from industrial ergonomics and a return to biological logic. Not comfort furniture, not office hardware. A creature that evolved to survive by precision, speed, and adaptability. And this is only half the system. Because a form like this demands an output space that can keep up with it, one that doesn't punish curvature with corners or break flow with seams. That's where the dual monitor field comes in. Next is section 4. Why rectangles and corners sabotage intent, and how circular visual logic restores continuity between hand, eye, and system. Section 4. Why corners break intent, and circles restore it. Rectangles were never chosen because they were ideal. They were chosen because they were easy to manufacture. Screens inherited their shape from paper, not perception. The human visual system does not scan in straight lines that terminate at right angles. It sweeps, arcs, and recenters. Eye motion is circular, elastic, and predictive. When a display forces vision into corners, it creates dead zones, places where motion doesn't continue, it stops. Every corner is a trap. When motion hits a corner, tracking breaks. The eye pauses. The brain reorients. Intent waits. This happens in milliseconds, but it happens constantly. Especially in dual monitor setups where the seam between displays acts like a fault line in space. The eye crosses it, the cursor snaps or disappears, and the body compensates again. Mori correction. Mori fatigue. Less flow. The solution was never bigger monitors or higher refresh. It was removing discontinuities. The dual monitor output paired with DualOperator is treated as a single visual field, not two screens pretending to cooperate. Circular and curved logic is layered on top of the rectangular hardware to reclaim continuity. Not because circles look cool, but because they don't end. Circular framing allows motion to wrap instead of collide. Tracking paths remain intact. The eye glides rather than snaps. The hand can maintain its arc without translating intent into right-angle compromises. This mirrors the Anole itself. The hand does not move in grids. The device does not express intent in grids. So the output should not punish curves with edges. When circular zones are used for tracking regions, camera motion, UI clustering, multi-character awareness, the system stops fighting the operator. Corners don't disappear physically, but they disappear functionally. They become background, not obstacles. The operator remains centered, oriented, and calm even as complexity increases. This is critical for future use cases. Multi-character control, split-role operation, simultaneous navigation and action, creative workflows where tools orbit attention instead of stealing it. The dual-monitor field becomes a stage, not a wall. And when input geometry, Anole, and output geometry, circular field logic, finally agree with each other, something subtle happens. You stop managing the system. You start inhabiting it. That's the shift. Section 5, Patent Implications. Why this is a system, not a gadget. What makes dual operator defensible is not a single shape, switch, or screen trick. It's the closed loop. Most hardware patents fail because they isolate a feature. A button placement, a sensor position, a curvature. Those can be copied, this cannot. Dual operator binds input geometry, output geometry, and behavioral mapping into one interdependent system. The Anole form only makes sense when paired with a continuous visual field. The visual field only works when driven by a device capable of expressing curvature, pressure gradient, and directional bias without translation loss. This is not an accessory. It is a language. From a patent perspective, the protection lives in the opposition-anchored input model, the abandonment of palm pressure stabilization, the use of circular/non-corner dominant output logic, the calibration loop between hand, device, and display. Remove one piece and the system degrades. Copying the shape without the output logic breaks intent. Copying the visual logic without the input geometry creates fatigue. The value exists in the relationship. This is why DualOperator does not compete with mice, keyboards, or controllers. It obsoletes the question they were answering. Section 6, Usage Scenarios, where this immediately changes the game. The first misunderstanding people will have is assuming this is for gaming. Gaming is only where the mismatch is loudest. Anywhere intent must remain continuous under load, DualOperator excels. In games, strafing, tracking, and activating collapse into one motion. Camera control stops fighting movement. Multi-character control becomes cognitively possible, not heroic. In creative work, timelines stop feeling linear and start feeling orbital. Tools cluster around attention instead of hiding in corners. Fine adjustments stop requiring mode switches. In multi-system operation, two monitors stop being left screen/right screen. They become a single navigable field. Context lives where the hand naturally arcs. And in future modes, simulation, orchestration, live ops, command interfaces, this matters even more. You are no longer clicking at things, you are steering through space. This is why the Anole is light, responsive, and unapologetically directional. It is not for casual contact. It is for sustained control. Section 7, circular screens are not a gimmick, they are a cognitive hack. Let's be clear, the hardware is still rectangular. The shift happens at the interface layer. Circular logic is introduced not to replace screens, but to override their worst behavior. Corners stop being endpoints. They become dead background space. Primary interaction lives in arcs, rings, and fields that never terminate abruptly. This does three things immediately. Reduces eye snap and reacquisition time. Preserves motion continuity during fast intent shifts. Keeps the operator centered under load. When paired with the Anole, this becomes instinctive. The hand moves in arcs. The cursor follows arcs. The interface expects arcs. There is no moment where intent has to be translated into grid logic. The system receives motion the way the nervous system emits it. This is why fatigue drops even when complexity rises. You're no longer fighting geometry. Section 8, Calibration, the unifying principle. Everything you've heard so far collapses into one word. Calibration. DualOperator is not about power, speed, or dominance. It is about removing distortion between intention and outcome. When input, output, and perception are calibrated to each other, effort drops not because the task is easier, but because resistance is gone. This is why the Anole is shaped the way it is. The palm is freed instead of supported. Corners are de-emphasized. Dual monitors become one field. Calibration is not tuning for comfort. It is tuning for truth. When a system is calibrated, mistakes become informative instead of punishing. Learning accelerates. Mastery becomes stable instead of brittle. This is the core idea behind DualOperator. Not a device. Not a layout. A calibrated relationship between human and machine. Here is section 9, entirely focused on dual monitor logic, why two rectangles fail, and how they become one continuous field instead of a split brain. Section 9, dual monitors are not two screens, they are one broken space. The mistake everyone makes with dual monitors is thinking they added space. They didn't. They added a seam. Traditional dual monitor setups treat each display as an independent rectangle. The operating system reinforces this illusion, two coordinate systems stitched together with a hard boundary in the middle. The cursor crosses it like a teleport, windows snap, UI elements vanish and reappear, the eye jumps, the neck compensates. This is not expansion. It is fracture. Humans do not think in left screen/right screen. We think in fields, zones of relevance that expand, contract, and recenter based on intent. When a system forces awareness to split, the brain begins doing extra work just to stay oriented. This is why dual monitors feel powerful at first and exhausting later. The problem is not size. It is continuity. DualOperator treats dual monitors as a single spatial organism. Not mirrored, not duplicated, unified. The goal is not more pixels, it is preserving motion coherence across the entire visual span. Here's the key insight. If motion feels continuous, the brain accepts space as singular, even if the hardware is not. This is why simply aligning two monitors edge to edge is insufficient. The seam still exists cognitively. The eye still feels the break. The cursor still behaves like it crossed a border. So DualOperator does something different. It defines a primary interaction field that spans both displays, a central, continuous zone where intent lives. Secondary information is allowed to exist peripherally, but core motion, tracking, and control are never forced to terminate at the bezel. The seam becomes irrelevant. Not hidden, not removed, ignored. And that changes everything. When the operator's hand moves in an arc, that arc does not end at the monitor edge. It continues across the field. When attention shifts, it slides, it does not snap. The dual monitors stop behaving like two destinations and start behaving like one environment. This is why the Anole matters here. The input device already expresses motion as bias, angle, and microrotation. If the output space punished that with discontinuities, the benefit would collapse. Instead, the output mirrors the same rules. No forced endpoints. No artificial center breaks. No right-angle dominance. This alignment allows something rare to happen in dual monitor setups. The operator stays centered. Not physically, cognitively. You are not looking left or looking right. You are operating within a space. This is the foundational requirement before circular logic even enters the picture. You cannot introduce curved or orbital UI into a fractured space. First, the field must be unified. Section 9 establishes that truth. Dual monitors only become powerful when they stop pretending to be separate. They must become one continuous motion surface, or they will always tax the operator. Section 10. Why circles are the only shape that can unify space. Section 10. Why circles are the only shape that can unify space. Once dual monitors are treated as a single field, the next problem becomes unavoidable. Where does motion live? Rectangles do not answer this question, they only define boundaries. A rectangular interface assumes that motion begins at a point and ends at an edge. It privileges straight lines, orthogonal paths, and terminal corners. This is fine for documents and grids. It collapses the moment motion becomes continuous, predictive, or multidirectional. The human nervous system does not issue commands like go to the edge. It issues trajectories. Circles are not an aesthetic choice here. They are the only geometry that does not impose an artificial stop. A circle has no corner, no terminal direction, no privileged axis. This makes it uniquely suited to serve as the primary interaction logic inside a unified dual-monitor field. When circular logic is introduced, several things happen immediately and predictably. First, motion stops colliding with the environment. Tracking paths wrap instead of crash. A camera pan does not hit the screen, it completes an arc. The eye stays engaged because the system behaves the way motion expects it to behave. Second, attention becomes center-weighted rather than edge-weighted. In rectangular systems, important information migrates to corners because that's where space exists. In circular systems, relevance orbits the operator. Information moves around focus instead of competing with it. Third, orientation becomes intrinsic. In a circle, up, down, left, and right are contextual, not absolute. This mirrors how the vestibular system and visual cortex actually maintain orientation, relative to center and motion, not grid alignment. This matters enormously in a dual monitor setup. A circle can span a seam without acknowledging it. A rectangle cannot. Rectangular UI elements crossing the bezel draw attention to the break. Circular fields absorb it. The seam becomes just another chord through a continuous form. The eye does not pause. The brain does not flag a transition. This is why circular radar, minimaps, and scopes have persisted across decades of interface design, not because they look good, but because they work under motion. DualOperator elevates this from a sub-element to a primary spatial language. Circular logic is used to anchor the operator's perceptual center, allow motion to persist without correction, let UI elements orbit rather than obstruct, maintain continuity across physical screen boundaries. Importantly, this does not mean everything becomes a circle. Rectangles still exist, but they are demoted. They become containers for static information, logs, text, and reference. Motion-critical elements live in curved or circular fields where intent is free to flow. This is the philosophical inversion. Instead of forcing motion to adapt to the screen adapts to motion. And now, for the first time, the Anole has a place to fully express itself. A curved intent emitter paired with a curved intent receiver. No translation layer. No correction tax. Just motion received honestly. Section 11 Combination without chaos, why circular logic scales. The real test of any interface is not how it performs with one task. It's how it behaves when multiple realities must coexist. This is where traditional dual-monitor setups fail hardest. When you add a second game client, a second camera feed, a second timeline, or a second character, rectangular logic forces a decision. Which one is primary? The rest are pushed to edges, minimized, overlapped, or mentally deprioritized. The operator begins juggling. Juggling is expensive. Circular logic removes the need to choose a single, main, rectangle by allowing multiple centers of relevance to exist within the same field, without collapsing into noise. Here's the key distinction. Rectangular systems stack. Circular systems orbit. Stacking creates hierarchy and occlusion. Orbiting creates relationship. In a circular dual-monitor field, multiple feeds can exist as arcs, sectors, or rings that share a common spatial language. They are not competing for dominance. They are positioned relative to each other and to the operator's center. This is how the brain already handles complexity. Your peripheral vision tracks motion without demanding focus. Your foveal vision locks onto what matters now. Circular layouts respect this division naturally. Rectangles fight it by demanding constant reorientation. This is why combining contexts becomes possible. Two characters can exist as adjacent arcs rather than split screens. A minimap can become a ring instead of a corner hostage. Cooldowns can pulse radially instead of cluttering bars. Timelines can curve around attention instead of stretching away from it. Importantly, nothing needs to be larger. Clarity comes from placement, not scale. This is why circular logic reduces overload even as information density increases. The operator is not reading more, they are situated better. Now connect this back to the Anole. The Anole does not express intent as binary clicks and straight drags. It expresses bias, lean, roll, pressure, micro-rotation. Circular fields receive bias cleanly. Rectangular grids quantize it into steps. This is what allows combination without collapse. When two or more control streams are active, the operator does not switch modes, they shift emphasis. One arc becomes dominant, another recedes, the hand adjusts angle, the eye adjusts focus, the system stays coherent. This is the first time dual monitors stop being a productivity hack and become a coordination surface. It enables dual character control without tunnel vision, simultaneous navigation and oversight, live orchestration instead of task hopping, cognitive load scaling without fatigue. And crucially, it scales forward. Add more feeds. Add more agents. Add more tools. As long as the system maintains orbital relationships instead of stacks, the operator remains calm, centered, and in control. This is not multitasking. This is multi-presence. Section 12: Why this is future-proof, and why it had to happen. What makes the dual-operator dual-monitor system durable is not the hardware, the shape, or even the circular logic on its own. It's that it aligns with how humans scale complexity. Every major leap in computing has happened when interfaces stopped fighting biology and started matching it. The mouse replaced typed coordinates. The GUI replaced command memory. Touch replaced abstraction with proximity. Each step reduced translation between intent and outcome. Dual operator continues that trajectory. As systems grow more complex, more agents, more tools, more simultaneous processes, rectangular logic does not scale. It fragments attention. It forces prioritization through exclusion. It demands that the operator choose what to ignore. Circular field logic scales by relation, not reduction. This is why the system is future-proof. It does not assume a fixed number of windows, feeds, or characters. It assumes motion, emphasis, and orbit. Those concepts remain valid whether you are controlling 2 game clients, a fleet of autonomous units, a creative pipeline, a live broadcast with multiple perspectives, or systems we haven't named yet. As AI agents, simulations, and cooperative control models become normal, the limiting factor will not be processing power. It will be human orientation. Dual operator solves for orientation first. The Anole expresses intent with curvature, bias, and pressure. The dual monitor field receives it without corners or seams. Circular logic keeps the operator centered even as complexity multiplies. Nothing here is locked to gaming. Gaming simply exposed the failure modes early because it stresses systems under real-time pressure. The same misalignments exist everywhere else, they're just tolerated longer. This is why this approach will outlast trends. It doesn't depend on screen size, resolution, refresh rate, or brute force input. It depends on calibration. When a system is calibrated, learning accelerates instead of plateauing, mastery becomes stable instead of brittle, fatigue becomes a signal, not a tax. That is the real outcome. Dual operator is not about doing more. It is about doing truer. And once you experience a system that no longer fights your intent, going back feels impossible, not because it's slower but because it's dishonest. This is the moment where input and output stop being separate disciplines. They become a single, living system. That is why this exists. That is why it scales. That is why it had to happen. Section 13, Distance, Vision, and why circles reduce strain instead of increasing it. One of the first objections people have when they hear circular monitor logic is distance. They assume it means leaning forward. They assume it means wrapping screens around the face. They assume it means more eye strain, not less. That assumption comes from rectangular thinking. In traditional monitor setups, optimal viewing distance is dictated by corners, not content. You sit far enough back to see the entire rectangle comfortably, because the corners are the furthest points from your visual center. This forces a compromise. Either the center is too close or the corners are too far. Your eyes pay for that mismatch. Circular logic changes this relationship fundamentally. In a circular display, the furthest points from the visual center are equidistant. There are no diagonal extremes, no corner points that silently demand extra accommodation from the eyes. This means the entire active visual field can sit closer to the operator without increasing strain. This is not theoretical, it's rooted in how accommodation and convergence work. The eyes are most comfortable when focal distance remains consistent across the field. Eye rotation stays within smooth arc ranges. Rapid refocusing between near-far extremes is minimized. Rectangular monitors violate all three. Corners sit farther away in angular terms. UI elements placed there require larger eye rotations and micro-refocusing. Over time, this contributes to dryness, fatigue, and that familiar screen compression feeling. Circular visual fields flatten this problem. When motion and information are distributed radially, the eyes remain closer to a neutral convergent state. The operator doesn't have to reach with their vision. Attention moves, but distance does not spike. This is why circular instruments have survived in aviation, navigation, and radar systems for decades. Not because they look elegant, but because they preserve perceptual stability under load. Now here's the critical clarification. DualOperator does not require fully circular hardware to gain these benefits. This is where the flat-edge circular monitor comes in. The concept is simple and deliberate. A primarily circular active display area, with one flattened edge specifically designed for attachment, allowing it to dock cleanly against rectangular monitors. The flat side is not a compromise. It is an interface. It allows circular logic to integrate into existing setups without forcing a total replacement of hardware ecosystems. The circle becomes the primary motion and intent surface, while rectangular displays handle static or reference content. This creates a hybrid environment. Circular for motion, tracking, and control. Rectangular for text, logs, chat, and static UI. From a distance perspective, this is ideal. The circular display sits closer, optimized for continuous gaze and motion. The rectangular companion sits slightly farther or peripheral, optimized for reading and reference. The operator no longer has to choose a single correct distance for incompatible tasks. Distance becomes task-aligned, not screen-aligned. And when paired with the DualOperator Anole, the system finally closes the loop. The hand expresses curved intent. The eyes receive curved motion. The body remains centered instead of stretched. This is not about novelty. It is about reducing unnecessary accommodation work, the silent tax that traditional monitors extract hour after hour. Circular logic lets the system come closer without crowding the user. That's the distinction. Section 14, the flat-edge circle, modularity without isolation. A fully circular monitor sounds elegant, and in isolation it is. But isolation is not the future. The real breakthrough is not a circle by itself, but a circle that knows how to connect. That's why the DualOperator display logic always includes a flat attachment edge, not as an afterthought, as a structural requirement. Pure circles are self-contained. Flat edges are social. The flat side allows the circular display to dock seamlessly against traditional rectangular monitors, additional circular units, vertical or horizontal stacks, mobile or auxiliary displays. This means the circle does not replace existing setups, it recenters them. Instead of forcing the operator to abandon rectangular monitors, the flat-edge circle becomes the primary motion nucleus. Everything else orbits it. Rectangles become satellites for static or reference information. The circle becomes the living field where motion, tracking, and intent reside. This solves a problem that curved and ultra-wide monitors never fully addressed. Ultra-wides stretch space horizontally, but they still privilege edges, exaggerate neck rotation, amplify peripheral distortion. They widen the rectangle instead of questioning it. The flat-edge circle questions it directly. By anchoring the circular display to a flat side, the system achieves three critical things at once. First, it preserves continuity. There is no gap, bevel, or visual interruption where the circle meets a rectangle. The transition is planar. The eye glides across it instead of reorienting. Second, it enables scalable layouts. Add one circle, then another. Dock rectangles where needed. Stack vertically without breaking the core motion field. The system grows by adjacency, not by fragmentation. Third, it allows role specialization. Not all screens need to do the same job. The circular display handles dynamic, time-sensitive, motion-heavy interaction. Rectangular displays handle reading, chat, inventory, logs, or timelines, tasks that benefit from straight lines and edges. This division of labor reduces cognitive conflict. Instead of one display trying to be everything, each shape is honest about what it's good at. This is why the flat-edge circle is not a design flourish, it is a compatibility contract. It says, you can enter the system gradually. You can keep your tools. You can expand without relearning space. From a future standpoint, this matters. As more operators adopt mixed environments, gaming, creative work, live control, orchestration, the system must accept heterogeneity. It cannot demand purity. It must allow calibration across differences. The flat-edge circle enables that. And when paired with the DualOperator Anole, something subtle but powerful happens. The hand controls a curved intent field. The eye receives it in a curved motion space. And the surrounding rectangles stop interfering, because they are no longer asked to do what they're bad at. This is not about replacing rectangles. It's about putting them back where they belong. Section 15, less motion, more coverage, the physics of efficiency. Efficiency in human, computer interaction is not about speed. It is about distance traveled per unit of intent. Every unnecessary movement of the hand, the eyes, the head, or the neck is a tax, individually small, cumulatively massive. Traditional multi-monitor setups quietly maximize this tax. Rectangular screens push important elements to corners and extremes. Dual monitors widen the field, but they also widen the required range of motion. To see everything, the operator must rotate the neck, shift the shoulders, increase eye saccade amplitude, refocus across inconsistent distances. This isn't hypothetical, it's biomechanical. Neck rotation beyond small angles increases muscle activation sharply. Eye saccades that jump between far-apart anchors increase refocusing time. Over hours, this compounds into fatigue and loss of fine control, even if posture looks ergonomic on paper. Circular logic attacks this at the root. By centering motion-critical content in a circular field, the system compresses the effective interaction radius. The operator covers more functional space with less physical displacement. This shows up in three concrete ways. First, reduced head and neck rotation. When primary interaction lives in a circle near the visual center, the neck stays neutral. Peripheral displays still exist, but they are consulted, not lived in. This lowers muscular load and preserves fine motor stability. Second, reduced eye travel distance. Circular layouts cluster dynamic elements at consistent angular distances from the center. The eyes move in smooth arcs instead of long jumps to corners. Accommodation remains stable. Reacquisition time drops. Third, reduced hand travel. The DualOperator Anole expresses intent through angle and bias, not displacement. When paired with a circular field that accepts that language, small inputs achieve large coverage without overshoot or correction. This is why mixed-shape layouts outperform uniform ones over long sessions. Uniform rectangles force every task through the same spatial logic, even when that logic is inappropriate. Mixed systems let each task live where it's cheapest to perform. Motion stays central. Reference goes peripheral. Control remains calm. Over time, this produces something operators notice immediately but struggle to articulate. They don't feel locked in. They feel unburdened. Accuracy improves not because they try harder, but because they are no longer fighting geometry. Reaction time stabilizes, errors decrease, sessions extend without the familiar cognitive compression. This is not magic. It is physics plus physiology. And it scales. As more displays are added, the operator's core interaction radius does not expand. It remains anchored. Complexity grows outward, but control stays centered. That is the hallmark of a system designed for humans, not machines. Section 16, Transition without friction, how this actually enters the world. The success of any new interface is not determined by how radical it is, but by how gently it can enter existing lives. This is where DualOperator's dual monitor logic matters most. The system does not demand abandonment. It offers recentering. A circular-first environment can be introduced incrementally. One circular display added to a familiar setup. One flat-edge circle docked against a trusted rectangle. One task migrated into the curved field. Nothing breaks, nothing forces relearning overnight. At first, the circular display becomes the motion surface. The place where tracking, camera control, navigation, or orchestration lives. Rectangular monitors continue handling chat, text, inventory, logs, the things they've always done well. Over time, operators notice a pattern. They gravitate back to the circle. Not because it's new, but because it's honest. It doesn't fight the hand. It doesn't strain the eyes. It doesn't demand posture corrections. As trust builds, more tasks migrate naturally. The circle grows from an assistive surface into a primary one. Additional circles can be added. Rectangles shift further outward. The system reorganizes itself around human comfort under complexity, not legacy assumptions. This is why the flat-edge design is critical. It ensures that circular displays are not islands. They are components. They combine, align, stack, and dock. They fit into desks, arms, walls, and rigs without forcing architectural redesign. From a market perspective, this is how paradigms change. Not by replacement, but by outperformance in lived experience. People don't switch because they're convinced. They switch because they feel better after long sessions. And this scales beyond enthusiasts. As workloads grow more simultaneous, gaming plus streaming, creation plus coordination, oversight plus action, the cost of fighting rectangular logic becomes impossible to ignore. DualOperator does not ask users to become different. It allows them to remain themselves longer. Centered, calm, precise. This is the real inevitability. Not circles replacing rectangles, but systems finally admitting that humans move in curves and designing accordingly. Section 17, Life without modes, radial task states. Modes are a confession of Section 17, Life without modes, radial task states. Modes are a confession of uncertainty. Every time a system asks you to switch modes, it is admitting it does not understand what you are trying to do. So it pauses the flow of intent and demands a declaration. Edit, move, aim, build, select, command. The human nervous system does not operate this way. Intent is continuous. It has weight, direction, and scope, not labels. Radial task states replace modes by letting where and how you act define what you are doing. In a circular first interface, space itself becomes the state machine. The closer your action is to the center, the more precise and committed it is. As intent moves outward, it naturally broadens in scope. Fine control lives near the core, Navigation and orchestration live farther out. Oversight and macro action live at the periphery. No button presses to switch context. No UI indicators screaming state changes. No cognitive interruption. The Anole makes this possible because it does not communicate in clicks alone. It communicates in bias, pressure, and angle. A light, shallow bias expresses exploration. A firm, centered pressure expresses commitment. A wider arc expresses movement or context shift. The system reads how the hand behaves and responds accordingly. This is not guessing. It is calibration. Think about what this eliminates. No accidental mode switches. No forgotten states. No "why did it do that" moments. The operator never leaves the flow to tell the system what they're doing. The system stays in flow with the operator. This is especially powerful under load. In games, aiming does not pause movement. Precision does not require stopping. Abilities do not steal focus from navigation. The system understands escalation and de-escalation through motion alone. In creative work, scrubbing becomes shaping. Editing becomes leaning. Zooming, selecting, adjusting, all collapse into a single continuous gesture language. In orchestration and multi-agent control, emphasis replaces toggling. One arc becomes dominant, another recedes, control shifts without hard transitions. Radial task states also scale with learning. New users naturally stay near the center, where precision is protected and mistakes are cheap. As confidence grows, their motion expands outward. Mastery literally occupies more space. The interface does not need tutorials to explain this. It teaches by feel. This is the most important shift DualOperator introduces. Not circles, not hardware, not monitors, the end of modes. Once you experience a system that never asks you to declare intent, only to express it, going back feels clumsy and bureaucratic. Life without modes is not faster. It is truer. Section 18, the moving center, letting the interface come to you. Most interfaces assume the user must remain still. The center of the screen is fixed. The camera is fixed. The workspace is fixed. If your intent shifts, you move your eyes, your hand, your posture to re-engage the system. That assumption is backwards. In the real world, when your attention shifts, the world does not ask you to recenter yourself. You lean, you angle, you adjust locally. Your body preserves equilibrium by making small corrections instead of large relocations. Dynamic centers bring this principle into the interface. Instead of anchoring interaction to a rigid center point, the circular field allows the center of relevance to drift, subtly, predictably, and within limits, toward where intent is expressed. This is not the screen sliding around. It is the gravity of interaction shifting. When the hand biases left, the active field leans left. When attention shifts upward, the center follows slightly. When precision increases, the center tightens and stabilizes. The operator does not chase focus. Focus meets the operator halfway. This dramatically reduces physical effort. Small motions stay small. The hand remains in its strongest range. The eyes avoid long jumps. The neck stays neutral. Over time, this has an enormous effect on fatigue. Instead of repeatedly recentering the body to match the interface absorbs microdrift and recenters itself. The operator remains calm, aligned, and precise even as tasks change. This is only possible in a circular-first system. Rectangular grids cannot move their center without breaking orientation. A drifting rectangle feels like instability. A drifting circle feels natural, because circles do not privilege edges or corners. Their center is conceptual, not structural. The Anole completes this loop. Because the Anole expresses intent through bias and pressure rather than displacement, the system can sense directional desire without requiring full commitment. The interface responds proportionally. Nothing snaps, nothing jumps. This creates a feeling operators often describe as, "I don't feel like I'm reaching anymore." Dynamic centers are especially powerful in multi-character awareness, creative timelines, live control and orchestration, Long streaming sessions. The system adapts to how you actually behave, not how a spec sheet assumes you should. Importantly, this does not remove control. The center does not wander freely. It is bounded, predictable, trainable. The operator learns its behavior the same way they learn balance, through experience, not instruction. This is the difference between automation and alignment. The interface is not deciding for you. It is listening. Section 19, Fatigue Adaptive Interfaces, Preserving Precision Over Time. Every interface today assumes the user is at their best. Fresh hands, fresh eyes, perfect attention. That assumption is wrong and expensive. Fatigue is not a failure state. It is a signal. The problem is that most systems ignore that signal until performance collapses. They treat every error the same, whether it comes from inexperience or exhaustion. The result is frustration, overcorrection, and eventually disengagement. A calibrated system does something different. It listens. In a dual-operator environment, fatigue does not have to be inferred from biometrics or invasive tracking. It reveals itself naturally through behavioral drift. Increased microcorrections. Overshoot followed by snapback. Tightening grip pressure. Longer reacquisition paths. Repeated near-miss actions. These are not mistakes. They are tells. Because the Anole expresses intent through pressure, bias, and angle, not just displacement, the system can detect when effort increases without intent increasing. That is the signature of fatigue. Circular and radial logic makes this readable. When motion starts to wobble near the center. When arcs become jagged. When the operator hesitates before committing. At that moment, the system has a choice. Traditional interfaces punish the user. Fatigue adaptive interfaces support them. Support does not mean slowing everything down or helping in a patronizing way. It means preserving the relationship between intent and outcome. Examples of subtle adaptation. Interaction rings widen slightly to forgive tremor. Dynamic centers stabilize instead of drifting. Sensitivity curves soften only where correction spikes. Visual density reduces without hiding information. Motion smoothing increases locally, not globally. The key is restraint. The system does not announce these changes. It does not ask permission mid-flow. It does not override intent. It simply removes noise. This allows precision to remain intact longer, even as physical or cognitive energy drops. The operator feels supported, not constrained. They stay in it instead of hitting an invisible wall. This is critical for long streams, competitive sessions, creative marathons, multi-agent orchestration, accessibility without stigma. Fatigue adaptive behavior also creates honest feedback loops. When the system subtly tightens and the operator feels relief, they learn where their limits are. When precision returns after a pause, they feel the difference. Calibration becomes something you sense, not something you read about. And importantly, adaptation is reversible. As the operator recovers, rings tighten again. Centers regain responsiveness. Sensitivity returns to baseline. The system respects state, not identity. This is the future of humane performance. Not infinite endurance. Not heroic suffering. But systems that understand that mastery is not about never tiring. It's about remaining precise when you do. Section 20, the core truths, what actually matters. Everything we've covered, hardware, monitors, circles, adaptation, reduces to a small set of truths. If these hold, the system holds. If these are violated, nothing else saves it. 1. Intent is continuous. Human intent does not switch states, it flows. Systems that force declarations interrupt truth. Systems that listen preserve it. Design rule. Never ask the user what they're doing if you can infer it from how they move. 2. Geometry is not neutral. Rectangles, corners, and seams are not harmless. They shape behavior, fatigue, and error patterns. Curves reduce correction. Corners create traps. Design rule. Motion-critical interaction must never terminate at a corner. 3. Input and output must speak the same language. A curved, bias-based input paired with a grid-based output creates translation loss. Precision dies in the conversion. Design rule. If the hand moves in arcs, the interface must receive arcs. 4. Modes are a design failure. Modes exist because systems cannot read intent. Radial task states exist because space can. Design rule. Let scope and pressure define state, not buttons. 5. The center is conceptual, not fixed. Attention moves. Systems that demand recentering exhaust the body. Systems that drift with intent preserve alignment. Design rule. The interface should absorb microdrift, so the operator doesn't have to. 6. Fatigue is a signal, not an error. Precision loss from fatigue is different from inexperience. Treating them the same is cruelty disguised as neutrality. Design rule. When effort rises without intent, reduce noise, don't punish. 7. Combination beats expansion. More space does not equal more control. Relationship does. Design rule. Orbit information around attention, instead of stacking it against edges. 8. Adoption must be gentle. Paradigms do not win by force, they win by relief. Design rule. New systems must dock into old ones without demanding surrender. 9. Calibration is the unifying principle. Calibration is not comfort, it is honesty between intention and outcome. Design rule. Remove distortion first, optimization comes later. 10. This is not about gaming. Gaming simply revealed the fractures early. These truths apply everywhere humans operate under load. Design rule. Design for the nervous system, not the use case. Final synthesis. DualOperator is not a device. Not a monitor. Not a layout. It is a calibrated relationship. Between hand and intent, eye and motion, effort and outcome. Circles are not the point. Modes disappearing is not the trick. Adaptation is not the feature. The point is this. When systems stop lying about how humans work, performance stops being a fight. That's the doctrine. Everything else is implementation. The DualOperator Manifest. A declaration of calibrated human-machine relationship. We begin with the DualOperator Manifest. A declaration of calibrated human-machine relationship. We begin with a rejection. We reject the idea that human input must be bent to fit machines. We reject the belief that rectangles, corners, modes, and menus are neutral. We reject the assumption that fatigue is weakness and discomfort is acceptable collateral. The modern interface did not fail because it lacked power. It failed because it misunderstood people. We assert the first truth: intent is continuous. Human intent does not switch states. It does not pause to declare itself. It does not think in grids, menus, or modes. Intent flows as pressure, bias, direction, and scope. Any system that forces a user to announce what they are doing before allowing them to do it has already broken trust. DualOperator begins by listening instead of demanding. We recognize geometry as a moral choice. Rectangles were chosen for manufacturing convenience, not human truth. Corners are not harmless, they interrupt motion, fracture attention, and tax correction. Every corner is a lie that motion must apologize for. Curves do not end. Arcs do not trap. Circles preserve continuity. Geometry is not aesthetic. It is behavioral. We unite input and output as one system. A curved hand paired with a rectangular world creates translation loss. Precision dies in the gap between how intent is expressed and how it is received. The DualOperator Anole speaks in angle, opposition, and micromotion. The visual field must answer in the same language. If the hand moves in arcs, the system must accept arcs. Anything else is distortion. We declare the end of modes. Modes are a confession of ignorance. They exist because systems cannot infer intent, so they force users to declare it manually, breaking flow every time. Radial task states replace modes with space. Precision lives near the center. Navigation lives farther out. Oversight lives at the periphery. State is no longer toggled. It is expressed. The system does not ask what you are doing. It watches how you do it. We free the center. Attention moves. Systems that demand the body recenter to match the interface create fatigue by design. The center of interaction is conceptual, not fixed. Dynamic centers allow the interface to drift toward intent within bounded, predictable limits. The operator remains calm, the hand stays strong, the neck stays neutral. The interface adapts to the human, not the reverse. We treat dual monitors as one field, not two screens. Adding screens without preserving continuity creates seams, not capability. DualOperator treats dual monitors as a single motion surface. The seam becomes irrelevant because interaction never terminates at the bezel. Space is unified not by pixels but by behavior. More screens do not mean more control. Only coherent space does. We use circles because they do not lie. Circular logic is not a gimmick. It is the only shape that does not impose false endpoints. Circular fields allow motion to wrap instead of collide. They allow attention to orbit instead of snap. Flat-edge circular displays exist not to isolate, but to connect, docking cleanly with rectangular monitors while preserving curved logic where it matters most. The circle becomes the living field. Rectangles return to reference duty. We measure efficiency in distance, not speed. Efficiency is not clicks per second. It is distance traveled per unit of intent. Circular layouts reduce eye-saccade distance. Dynamic centers reduce hand travel. Unified fields reduce head and neck rotation. The result is not strain avoidance. It is sustained precision. We recognize fatigue as a signal. Fatigue is not failure. It is information. Correction spikes, grip tightening, hesitation, these are tells, not errors. A calibrated system responds by reducing noise, widening tolerance slightly, stabilizing centers, softening sensitivity only where needed. The system preserves the relationship between intent and outcome instead of punishing endurance. Adaptation is quiet, reversible, respectful. We believe combination beats expansion. Stacking windows creates hierarchy and overload. Orbiting information creates relationship and clarity. Circular logic allows multiple agents, feeds, and contexts to coexist without chaos, as arcs, sectors, and emphasis shifts instead of split screens. This is not multitasking. It is multi-presence. We demand gentle adoption. Paradigms do not win by force. They win by relief. DualOperator does not demand replacement. It docks, it integrates, it recenters. One circle added. One task migrated. Trust earned through lived experience. People switch not because they are convinced, but because they feel better after long sessions. We name the unifying principle calibration. Calibration is not comfort. It is honesty. When effort maps cleanly to outcome, learning accelerates. When distortion is removed, mastery stabilizes. When systems stop lying, performance stops being a fight. We end with the final truths. DualOperator is not a mouse, not a monitor, not a layout. It is a calibrated relationship between hand and intent, eye and motion, effort and outcome. Gaming revealed the fracture early. But these truths apply everywhere humans operate under load. This manifesto is not about novelty. It is about alignment. And once alignment is felt, going back is impossible. Not because the old way is slower, but because it is dishonest. What follows are sections 21-24, written as a cohesive mini-arc under why productivity caps exist, neuroscience, dual interfacing, and the limits of modern input. This arc explains why people hit ceilings even when they optimize, and why DualOperator exists as a response, not an upgrade. Section 21. Productivity caps are neurological, not motivational. Most productivity ceilings are misdiagnosed. When people stall, the common explanations are lack of discipline, lack of skill, lack of better tools, burnout. But neuroscience tells a different story. The brain does not fail because it is lazy. It fails because it is oversaturated. Every action you take through an interface requires motor planning, sensory prediction, feedback comparison, error correction. When input systems force unnecessary corrections, extra eye jumps, hand travel, mode switches, posture adjustments, they quietly consume cognitive bandwidth. You don't feel this as thinking harder. You feel it as friction. Eventually, the system hits a ceiling where more effort produces diminishing returns. Focus collapses faster. Mistakes increase despite experience. This is the productivity cap. Not a lack of will, a lack of alignment. Traditional tools push users to compensate neurologically for design flaws. The brain becomes the shock absorber for bad geometry, bad state management, and broken continuity. That compensation has a limit. When the limit is reached, no amount of motivation breaks through it, because the bottleneck is neural throughput, not desire. Section 22, single-channel input is the silent bottleneck. Nearly all modern interfaces assume serial control. One dominant hand, one cursor, one focus channel, one action at a time. Even when we multitask, we are time-slicing attention, rapidly switching a single control stream between tasks. This is expensive. Each switch incurs a neurological reset cost. The human brain, however, is not single-channeled. We evolved to move and observe simultaneously, adjust posture while tracking targets, manipulate tools while scanning the environment. Dual interfacing does not add complexity. It restores parallelism. When input is distributed across hands, across motion types, across intent layers, the brain no longer has to serialize everything through one narrow control path. This is why musicians use both hands independently. Pilots use hands and feet simultaneously. Athletes coordinate multiple limbs without conscious effort. Modern input systems collapse all of that into one hand and one pointer, then wonder why people plateau. Productivity caps emerge because the interface forces a parallel brain into a serial workflow. DualOperator breaks that bottleneck by allowing simultaneous navigation and action, layered intent without mode switching, parallel microadjustments instead of sequential commands. This is not about speed. It is about throughput. Section 23. Cognitive load comes from translation, not difficulty. Difficulty is not the enemy of productivity. Translation is every time intent must be translated from thought right arrow menu right arrow mode right arrow action, cognitive load spikes. Not because the task is hard, but because the brain is doing unnecessary work to explain itself to the system. Modern interfaces are translation heavy. Switch to edit mode. Hold this key to modify behavior. Click here then there. These are not natural actions. They are bureaucratic ones. The brain excels at continuous control. It struggles with artificial state declarations. When translation cost exceeds task cost, productivity collapses. Dual interfacing paired with radial task states removes translation layers. Intent is expressed directly through motion, pressure, and bias. The system responds proportionally, not symbolically. This is why experienced users often say, "I'm not thinking anymore, I'm just doing." That is not mindlessness. That is low translation overhead. Productivity caps lift when the system stops asking the brain to speak a foreign language. Section 24, Why Mori optimization stops working, and what actually breaks the cap. At a certain point, optimization fails. Higher DPI. Mori shortcuts. Better macros. Mori monitors. All of these amplify throughput only if the underlying channel is not saturated. Once neural correction, translation, and compensation costs max out, optimization accelerates failure instead of performance. Errors happen faster, fatigue arrives sooner, focus degrades more sharply. This is why elite users often hit walls that beginners never see. They are not less capable. They are closer to the system's true limits. Breaking productivity caps requires changing the shape of interaction, not refining the same one. DualOperator breaks the cap by distributing control across parallel channels, removing translation layers, preserving continuity under load, adapting to fatigue instead of punishing it. This does not make people superhuman. It removes the artificial ceiling imposed by mismatched tools. When input and output are calibrated to how the nervous system already works, productivity no longer spikes and crashes. It stabilizes. That is the real breakthrough. Not infinite output. Sustainable clarity. Section 21. Productivity caps are neurological, not motivational. When people hit productivity ceilings, the explanation is almost always framed as a personal failure. They're told they need more discipline, more focus, better habits, stronger motivation. This diagnosis is wrong. Productivity caps exist even in highly motivated, highly skilled people because the limiting factor is not willpower, it is neurological throughput. Every interaction with a computer requires the brain to run a loop. Plan the motion, predict the outcome, execute the action, compare feedback, correct error. This loop runs hundreds or thousands of times per hour. When the interface is aligned, the loop is cheap. When the interface is misaligned, the loop becomes expensive. Modern input systems quietly inflate this cost. Rectangular screens force extra eye travel. Single-point cursors force serial control. Modes force state declarations. Corners force abrupt motion correction. None of these feel dramatic in isolation. The brain compensates automatically. But compensation is not free, it consumes neural resources that could have been used for creativity, problem-solving, or precision. Over time, these microcosts stack. The operator reaches a point where effort increases, output plateaus, mistakes rise, recovery time lengthens. This is the productivity cap. Not burnout, not laziness, not lack of skill. It is the brain hitting the limit of how much correction and translation it can perform while still maintaining clarity. Neuroscience is clear on this. Sustained performance depends on predictability and continuity. When systems behave in ways the nervous system expects, cognitive load stays low. When systems violate those expectations, the brain must intervene consciously. That intervention has a ceiling. Once the ceiling is reached, pushing harder does not help. It accelerates collapse. This is why people describe hitting a wall even when they care deeply about the work and know exactly what to do. The wall is not psychological. It is architectural. Modern productivity tools were never designed to respect neural limits. They were designed around manufacturing convenience, legacy paradigms, and symbolic control, not embodied cognition. So the brain does what it always does: it adapts. It absorbs the mismatch until it can't. This is why true breakthroughs in productivity do not come from better habits or faster shortcuts. They come from removing unnecessary correction work from the nervous system. When friction is removed, productivity does not spike. It stabilizes. And stability is what allows people to work longer, think deeper, and maintain precision without collapse. Productivity caps exist because modern input systems ask the brain to do too much invisible labor. Change the system and the cap moves. Section 22, single-channel input is the hidden bottleneck. Modern computers are built on a quiet assumption that humans should control complex systems one channel at a time. One dominant hand, one cursor, one focal action. Everything else is treated as secondary or sequential. This assumption is not based on neuroscience. It is based on historical convenience. The human brain is not single-channeled. We evolved to operate in parallel, moving while observing, adjusting posture while manipulating tools, tracking threats while navigating terrain. These behaviors do not feel like multitasking because they are not. They are distributed control, different neural circuits handling different aspects of the same task simultaneously. Modern input systems collapse this natural parallelism into a serial pipeline. To move and act, you must stop one action, switch focus, reassign the same hand, reorient the same cursor, then continue. Each switch carries a neurological cost. The brain must disengage the previous motor plan, load a new one, remap spatial context, verify state. This happens in fractions of a second, but it happens constantly. Over time, the cost becomes dominant. This is why productivity feels sharp at first and dull later. Not because the work got harder, but because the system forced too many context swaps through a single channel. Single-channel input creates an artificial ceiling. No matter how skilled the user becomes, they are still funneling all intent through one narrow pipe. Experience reduces error, but it cannot widen the pipe. This is why expert users platter. Advanced shortcuts feel brittle. Speed gains come with higher error rates. The brain is trying to do parallel work through a serial interface. Dual interfacing does not increase complexity. It restores bandwidth. By distributing control across multiple channels, hands, motion types, intent layers, the brain no longer has to serialize everything. Navigation can occur while action is expressed. Adjustment can happen without interrupting control. Oversight can coexist with execution. This mirrors how humans already perform at their best. Pilots do not fly with one hand and one channel of attention. Musicians do not play by time-slicing fingers. Athletes do not move by issuing discrete commands. They operate through coordinated, parallel systems. Modern computing forced humans into a bottleneck they were never designed for, then blamed them for hitting it. Breaking the productivity cap requires widening the channel, not optimizing the choke point. Dual interfacing is not about doing more things at once. It is about letting the brain work the way it already knows how to work. When control is distributed instead of serialized, effort drops, clarity rises, and throughput increases without strain. That is the real unlock. Section 23. Cognitive load comes from translation, not difficulty. Most people misunderstand what actually makes work exhausting. They think it's complexity. They think it's difficulty. They think it's the number of things on the screen. But the brain does not get tired from doing hard things. It gets tired from translating intent into forms the system demands. Translation is the real tax. Every time you interact with a modern interface, you are forced to translate thought into symbols, symbols into modes, modes into actions, actions back into feedback. None of this is inherent to the task itself. It exists only because the system cannot understand intent directly. Consider how often you are asked to switch tools, toggle modes, hold modifier keys, confirm states, remember invisible rules. These are not difficult actions. They are bureaucratic ones. The brain excels at continuous control. It struggles with artificial state management. When forced to constantly explain itself to the system, cognitive load spikes, not because the work is hard, but because the interface is uncooperative. This is why people often say, "I know exactly what I want to do, I just can't get the system to do it." That sentence is a translation failure. Every translation layer introduces latency, error, and fatigue. The brain must pause flow to perform symbolic reasoning instead of embodied action. Over time, this drains attention far faster than the task itself ever could. Difficulty challenges the brain. Translation exhausts it. This is why experts feel frustration more acutely than beginners. They see the intent clearly, but are slowed by systems that require unnecessary declarations and confirmations. When translation cost exceeds task cost, productivity collapses. Dual interfacing paired with radial task states removes translation layers entirely. Instead of telling the system what mode you're in, you express scope through space. Instead of declaring intent through buttons, you express it through pressure and bias. The system responds proportionally, not symbolically. Nothing needs to be explained. Nothing needs to be named. Nothing needs to be remembered. This is why skilled users describe aligned systems as transparent. They are not thinking less. They are translating less. And when translation disappears, cognitive load drops dramatically, even as task difficulty increases. The brain stays engaged, not drained. Flow becomes sustainable instead of fleeting. The biggest productivity gains in history did not come from making tasks easier. They came from removing unnecessary translation between intent and outcome. That is the real ceiling breaker. Section 24, Why Optimization Eventually Fails, and What Actually Breaks the Cap. Optimization works until it doesn't. Early gains come easily. Higher DPIs, faster shortcuts, better layouts, more screens, tighter macros. At first output rises, you feel sharper, faster, more capable. Then something strange happens. You add more optimization and performance stalls. Add more and errors increase. Add more and fatigue arrives sooner. This is not because optimization is wrong. It's because optimization has a ceiling. Most optimization strategies assume the interaction model itself is sound. They tune sensitivity, speed, and efficiency within the same shape of control. But once neural correction, translation, and context switching costs saturate, optimization stops amplifying performance and starts amplifying failure. At that point, mistakes happen faster. Overcorrection increases. Recovery time lengthens. Confidence becomes brittle. This is why elite users often hit walls that beginners never encounter. They are not less capable. They are closer to the true limits of the system. Single-channel input becomes saturated. Translation overhead dominates. Cognitive load outpaces throughput. No shortcut can fix that. No setting can fix that. No discipline can fix that. Because the bottleneck is no longer skill. It is interface shape. Breaking the productivity cap requires changing the geometry of interaction, not refining it. Dual interfacing changes the shape by restoring parallel control. Radial task states remove mode switching. Circular fields preserve continuity. Dynamic centers reduce reorientation. Fatigue adaptation protects precision instead of punishing endurance. Each change reduces invisible neural labor. Not by making the user better, but by asking less unnecessary work of the nervous system. This is why performance stops spiking and crashing. It stabilizes. Stability is the signal that the cap has moved. When the interaction model is aligned, optimization works again, but now it compounds instead of collapses. Skill builds without brittleness, speed increases without chaos, endurance extends without burnout. This is the difference between pushing harder and pushing smarter. Modern productivity tools hit ceilings because they were never designed for sustained clarity under load. Change the shape of interaction, and the ceiling is no longer where you thought it was. Why productivity caps exist. Neuroscience, dual interfacing, and the limits of modern input. Productivity ceilings are rarely what people think they are. When output stalls, the usual explanations point inward: lack of discipline, lack of focus, burnout, or insufficient optimization. But these explanations fail to account for a critical fact: productivity caps appear even in highly motivated, highly skilled users who care deeply about their work. The real limit is not psychological. It is neurological. Every interaction with a digital system forces the brain to run a control loop: plan motion, predict outcome, execute action, evaluate feedback, and correct error. When an interface is aligned with human expectations, this loop is cheap. When it is misaligned, the loop becomes expensive. Modern input systems quietly inflate this cost. Rectangular screens force unnecessary eye travel. Corners force abrupt motion correction. Modes force symbolic state declarations. Single cursors force serial control. None of these feel catastrophic on their own. The brain compensates automatically, absorbing mismatch through increased effort, tighter focus, and more correction. But compensation is not free. It consumes neural bandwidth that could otherwise support creativity, precision, and sustained clarity. Over time, the cost accumulates. Effort increases. Output plateaus. Errors rise. Recovery takes longer. This is the productivity cap. Not laziness. Not lack of skill. But the nervous system reaching the limit of how much invisible labor it can perform to keep broken interfaces usable. A major contributor to this ceiling is single-channel input. Nearly all modern systems assume serial control: one dominant hand, one cursor, one action stream at a time. Even when users multitask, they are time-slicing attention, rapidly switching a single control channel between tasks. Each switch incurs a neurological reset cost, disengaging a motor plan, remapping context, verifying state. The human brain was never designed to work this way. We evolved for parallel control, moving while observing, adjusting while tracking, acting while scanning. Musicians, pilots, and athletes all operate through distributed control systems without conscious effort. Modern interfaces collapse this natural parallelism into a bottleneck, then blame users when throughput plateaus. Experience reduces error, but it cannot widen a saturated channel. As skill increases, the ceiling becomes more visible. Optimization accelerates error instead of performance. Shortcuts feel brittle. Speed gains come with instability. The bottleneck is no longer the user. It is the interface. Another silent contributor is translation overhead. The brain does not tire from difficulty. It tires from being forced to translate intent into artificial symbols. Mode switches, modifier keys, tool toggles, and state confirmations are not hard actions, they are bureaucratic ones. Every translation layer interrupts flow and demands symbolic reasoning instead of embodied action. Over time, translation cost eclipses task cost. This is why experts often feel more frustration than beginners. They see intent clearly, but are slowed by systems that require explanation before execution. When translation cost exceeds task cost, productivity collapses. Optimization cannot fix this. At a certain point, higher DPI, more monitors, and faster shortcuts stop helping. They amplify the same misalignment faster. Errors multiply, fatigue arrives sooner, focus becomes brittle. This is why elite users hit walls beginners never encounter. They are closer to the system's true limits. Breaking productivity caps requires changing the shape of interaction, not refining it. Dual interfacing restores parallel control, widening neural bandwidth instead of saturating it. Radial task states eliminate mode switches by letting space express scope. Circular visual fields preserve continuity and reduce correction. Dynamic centers absorb microdrift so the body remains aligned. Fatigue adaptive behavior protects precision instead of punishing endurance. Each change removes unnecessary neural labor. The result is not superhuman output. It is sustained clarity. When intent maps cleanly to outcome, performance stabilizes instead of spiking and crashing. Learning accelerates. Mastery becomes resilient. Optimization works again, not because the user tries harder, but because the system finally stops demanding invisible work from the nervous system. Productivity caps exist because modern tools ask the brain to compensate for design mismatches. Change the interface shape, and the cap moves. Section 25. Why smarter AI doesn't break productivity caps and better input does. The current Section 25. Why smarter AI doesn't break productivity caps and better input does. The current wave of AI optimism rests on a quiet assumption that intelligence is the bottleneck. If systems could just think better, generate better suggestions, predict intent more accurately, automate more steps, productivity would scale indefinitely. But this assumption fails in practice. People are not capped because systems lack intelligence. They are capped because humans cannot effectively steer what already exists. AI expands possibility space. Input determines how much of that space can be navigated. This is why smarter AI often feels overwhelming instead of empowering. More suggestions, more options, more branches, more decisions. All of it still flows through the same narrow interaction channel. A single cursor, a single hand, serial decision-making, rectangular interfaces, mode-heavy workflows. The result is paradoxical. As systems become more intelligent, operators become more constrained. The problem is not AI quality. It is control bandwidth. Human cognition works best when intent, action, and feedback are tightly coupled. When the gap between I want and it happens is small and continuous, humans can steer extremely complex systems with confidence. When that gap widens, through menus, confirmations, mode switches, or symbolic translation, intelligence becomes noise. AI does not remove this gap. It often widens it. Because AI outputs possibilities faster than humans can evaluate them through constrained input channels. The operator becomes a bottleneck not of intelligence, but of embodied control. This is why so many AI tools feel impressive in demos and exhausting in daily use. They talk faster than the body can answer. DualOperator addresses the real constraint, the steering problem. Better input does not mean more buttons or shortcuts. It means restoring the natural bandwidth of human control. Parallel action instead of serial commands. Continuous expression instead of discrete declarations. Spatial reasoning instead of symbolic negotiation. When input is calibrated, AI becomes tractable. Instead of issuing prompts and waiting, the operator can bias systems gradually, adjust direction mid-flow, explore without committing, intervene without breaking context. This is how humans already control complex systems in the physical world: vehicles, instruments, teams, environments. AI needs operators more than operators need AI. But operators need interfaces that can keep up. Until input systems change, smarter AI will continue to hit the same ceiling, not because it cannot think, but because humans cannot embody control fast enough to guide it. That is why better input matters more than smarter AI. AI expands the map. Input determines whether you can drive it. Section 26. Why experts plateau first and why it's not their fault. Beginners rarely hit productivity ceilings. Experts do. This feels backwards until you understand where limits actually lie. Early in learning, gains come easily because the system itself is forgiving. The user is slow, errors are obvious, and the interface absorbs imprecision. Improvement comes from basic familiarity and reduced hesitation. As skill increases, something changes. Experts stop making conceptual mistakes. They start fighting structural ones. At high levels of proficiency, performance is no longer limited by knowing what to do. It is limited by how cleanly intent can be expressed and corrected in real time. This is where modern interfaces quietly fail their best users. Experts operate closer to the edge of precision. They make smaller movements, faster adjustments, tighter timing decisions, finer distinctions. Rectangular interfaces, single-channel input, and mode-heavy systems were never designed for this regime. They are optimized for general use, not high-resolution control. As expertise increases, the interface noise becomes dominant. Corners induce microcorrections. Modes interrupt flow. Cursor loss costs more. Translation overhead compounds. Beginners don't notice this because their actions are already coarse. Experts feel it immediately as friction, brittleness, and frustration. This is why experts often describe feeling boxed in or stuck despite deep understanding and effort. Their skill has outgrown the interface. Optimization makes this worse. Shortcuts, macros, and higher sensitivity increase throughput only until error rates spike. The margin for correction shrinks. Performance becomes unstable. The expert is forced to slow down not because they lack ability, but because the system cannot tolerate precision without punishment. This creates a false narrative. That mastery has diminishing returns. That plateau is inevitable. That pushing further requires sacrifice. In reality, the plateau belongs to the tool, not the user. Dual interfacing changes this dynamic. By restoring parallel control, removing mode switches, and aligning geometry with natural motion, the system scales with expertise instead of against it. Precision becomes cheaper instead of more fragile. Fine control does not demand disproportionate effort. This is why experts plateau first, and why they benefit most from calibrated systems. Beginners need forgiveness. Experts need truth. They need interfaces that do not lie about motion, state, or intent. When the interface stops distorting expression, mastery resumes its natural curve. Not infinite but honest, not brittle but resilient. The ceiling moves, not because the expert changed, but because the system finally met them where they already were. Section 27. Calibration as a universal principle. Why this pattern keeps reappearing. Calibration is not a feature. It is not a technique. It is not even a design philosophy. It is a law of alignment that shows up everywhere humans interact with systems. Whenever performance collapses, frustration rises, or mastery plateaus, the root cause is almost always the same. The system is no longer calibrated to the human operating it. This is not limited to technology. You see it in musical instruments that fight the player, vehicles that feel twitchy or numb, workplaces that burn people out, training systems that reward compliance over understanding. In every case, the failure is not effort. It is mismatch. Humans function best when small effort produces proportional outcome. Feedback arrives continuously, not symbolically. Correction is cheap and reversible. Intent does not require explanation. This is calibration. When calibration exists, learning accelerates naturally. When it breaks, people compensate until they can't. Modern systems often confuse calibration with comfort. Comfort removes effort. Calibration removes distortion. A calibrated system can feel demanding. It can require precision, attention, and skill, but it never lies. When you fail, you know why. When you succeed, it feels earned. When you improve, the system improves with you. This is why calibration scales across domains. In skill development, beginners need wide margins. Experts need tight correspondence. A calibrated system adapts the margin without changing the truth of the interaction. In technology, more power without calibration overwhelms. More automation without calibration alienates. AI systems fail when they act for humans instead of with them. Automation breaks calibration when it removes the feedback loop that teaches cause and effect. Dual operator exists because modern computing lost calibration in pursuit of abstraction. Rectangles replaced curves. Modes replaced flow. Single cursors replaced parallel control. Symbols replaced embodied action. Each step made systems easier to build and harder to inhabit. What we are doing now is not inventing something new. We are realigning. The hand moves in arcs. The eye attends in gradients. The nervous system learns through continuous feedback. When tools respect this, people flourish. When they don't, people burn out, even when everything else looks optimized. Calibration is why experts feel boxed in by bad tools. Smarter AI feels harder to use. Productivity gains collapse into fatigue. And calibration is why mastery feels effortless when systems align. Flow states emerge reliably. Complexity becomes navigable instead of oppressive. This is the deeper reason dual operator matters. Not because it is circular. Not because it is dual. Not because it is new. But because it restores a truthful relationship between human intent and system response. Calibration is not optional. It is what determines whether a system amplifies human capability or consumes it. Section 28. What the invention actually is: a human-readable summary. At its core, this invention is a geometry-aware display system designed to reduce cognitive load by aligning screens, cursor behavior, and visual organization with how humans actually see and move. Modern computers assume rectangles. Humans do not. The problem the invention solves. Rectangular displays create corners, edges, and seams that trap cursors, fragment attention, force repeated corrective motion, increase eye, head, and hand movement, and silently exhaust users over time. These problems get worse with large monitors, dual or multi-monitor setups, precision input, long sessions. Attempts to fix this by adding more screens or software layers preserve the same flawed assumptions. The invention changes the geometry itself. The core idea. The system introduces primarily circular display regions that better match natural human motion and attention, while retaining flat boundary regions, so the system remains compatible with existing operating systems, taskbars, menus, and applications. DualOperator Provisional WITHCO. This is not an art project or a novelty monitor. It is a hybrid geometry. Circular where motion and focus matter. Flat where legacy software requires it. What makes it practical, not theoretical? Circular visual field, no corners where you work. The primary display area is circular, eliminating angular corners that cause cursor trapping, overshoot, and correction cycles. This aligns with the fact that human hand motion is naturally arc-based, not rectilinear. DualOperator Provisional WITHCO. Flat boundary regions, compatibility layer. Each circular display includes at least one flat edge. This flat region is where operating system UI elements live, taskbars, menus, notifications, so nothing breaks and no software needs to be rewritten. DualOperator Provisional WITHCO. Modular multi-display fitting. Displays are designed to physically and visually fit together using these flat edges. Two circular displays can dock directly. Multiple displays can connect through a polygonal connector module, e.g., hexagonal or octagonal, to form radial flower-like arrangements without chaotic seams. DualOperator provisional WITH co. Geometry-aware operating environment, optional but powerful. A software layer can detect the actual geometry of the displays and adjust cursor behavior, window placement, and interaction zones accordingly, without modifying the operating system kernel or applications. DualOperator provisional WITH co. Cursor motion becomes smoother near curved boundaries. Edge trapping and loss are reduced. Focus transitions across displays feel continuous. Windows organize radially instead of stacking into corners. Works with existing input devices. The system does not require special hardware. It works with conventional mice, keyboards, controllers, or precision input devices. However, it is especially well suited to articulated, precision-oriented input, where small motions matter more than large sweeps. DualOperator provisional WITH co. Why this matters? The invention reduces invisible work the brain is forced to do when using computers. Fewer corrections. Fewer context losses. Less visual hunting. Less physical recentering. This results in lower cognitive load. More predictable control. Sustained precision. Better endurance. Importantly, this is achieved without replacing existing software ecosystems. The system layers onto what already exists instead of demanding a reset. What this is not. It is not a gimmick display. It is not VR. It is not a replacement operating system. It is not input device dependent. It is a platform-level correction to a geometric assumption that has gone unchallenged for decades. The one-sentence definition. A modular, geometry-aware display system that replaces corner-dominated rectangular interaction with circular, arc-aligned visual fields, while remaining fully compatible with existing operating systems and workflows. Why it exists? Because humans move in curves. Because attention is continuous. Because precision should not require exhaustion. And because no amount of software intelligence can compensate for a system that forces the nervous system to fight its own tools. The dual operator pitch, approximately 60 seconds. Modern computers were built around rectangles. Humans weren't. Corners, edges, and seams quietly force the brain to do extra work, correcting cursors, recentering attention, switching modes, fighting geometry. Over time, that invisible effort creates fatigue, plateaus, and frustration, even for highly skilled users. This invention fixes that at the root. DualOperator is a geometry-aware display system that replaces corner-dominated interaction with primarily circular visual fields, aligned to how humans actually move and see, while keeping flat edges where operating systems need them, so nothing breaks. The circular region removes cursor traps and correction cycles. The flat boundary keeps taskbars, menus, and existing software fully compatible. Displays are modular. They physically and visually dock together through flat edges, forming clean multi-display systems instead of chaotic seams. An optional geometry-aware software layer adapts cursor behavior and window placement to the actual shape of the screens, reducing cognitive load without replacing the OS. This isn't VR. It isn't a gimmick. It works with existing hardware and input devices. The result is simpler. Less correction, less fatigue, more sustained precision. Smarter software can't fix bad geometry. The strongest, better geometry, most relatable immediately fixes how software feels. After everything you've built, DualOperator. The result is simpler. Less correction, less fatigue, more sustained precision. Smarter software can't fix bad geometry. But better geometry immediately fixes how software feels. DualOperator doesn't make people work harder. It stops making them fight their tools. The strongest, most relatable arc for 2932. After everything you've built, the most powerful and human progression is this. 29. Why modern work feels harder than it should. Right arrow burnout fatigue. Why am I tired after sitting still? Lived experience. 30. Why we mistook optimization for progress. Shortcuts, macros, AI, hustle culture, diminishing returns. 31. What a calibrated future actually looks like day to day. Right arrow concrete lived scenarios. Work, gaming, creation, learning. 32. The call forward. Why this moment matters now. Right arrow. Why this isn't optional anymore. Why timing matters. What happens if we don't chain. This arc is powerful because it speaks to everyone, not just technologists. It validates what people already feel. It makes DualOperator feel inevitable, not aspirational. Now I'll begin. Section 29. Why modern work feels harder than it should. Most people don't describe modern work as difficult. They describe it as draining. They sit in chairs. They move a mouse. They type on a keyboard. And yet, at the end of the day, they feel exhausted in a way that doesn't match the physical effort involved. This disconnect confuses people. They wonder, why am I tired when I didn't do anything strenuous? Why does my focus collapse after a few hours? Why do I feel fried even when I'm motivated? The answer is not stress alone. It's not screen time alone. It's not discipline. It's constant low-level neurological friction. Modern work environments demand continuous microcorrections. Recentering attention. Relocating cursors. Switching modes. Scanning edges and corners. Translating intent into symbolic actions. None of these actions feel meaningful. None of them feel productive. But they never stop. The brain is forced into a state of permanent compensation, quietly correcting for systems that don't align with how humans naturally move, see, and decide. This is why people feel tired without feeling accomplished. Their energy wasn't spent solving problems. It was spent fighting the interface. Even moments of success are fragile, focus breaks easily, flow states are rare, precision fades faster than it should. And because this friction is invisible, people blame themselves. They assume they're losing discipline. They're getting older. They're burned out. In reality, they're operating inside systems that leak effort constantly. The tragedy is that most people have never experienced what aligned work feels like. Work where effort maps cleanly to outcome, where the system doesn't interrupt thought just to function. So they normalize exhaustion. DualOperator exists because this exhaustion is not inevitable. It is designed. And what is designed can be redesigned. Section 30. Why we mistook optimization for progress. When systems started to feel heavy, we didn't question their shape. We optimized them. Faster CPUs. Higher refresh rates. More shortcuts. More monitors. More automation. Smarter AI. Each upgrade promised relief. And for a moment it worked. Tasks sped up, friction felt lower, output increased, but underneath something stayed wrong and quietly got worse. Optimization didn't remove friction. It amplified throughput through the same misalignment. This is the mistake. Optimization assumes the underlying interaction model is sound. It asks, how do we do this faster? Instead of why does this feel hard at all? So we pushed harder on the same geometry. Rectangles got wider. Menus got deeper. Shortcuts got denser. AI got louder. The system became faster at asking the brain to compensate. At first, skilled users thrived. They learned the shortcuts. They memorized the modes. They internalized the workarounds. Productivity rose, but only because they were paying an increasing cognitive tax to make the system behave. Then the returns diminished. Speed increased, but error rates climbed. Automation increased, but oversight became exhausting. AI suggested more, but deciding became harder. This is why modern tools often feel paradoxical. I can do more than ever, and I'm more tired than ever. Optimization without alignment doesn't free humans. It demands more of them. Every shortcut is a promise that the system will behave, but only if you remember the rule. Every macro is a contract that breaks the moment context shifts. Every automation removes effort but also removes feedback, forcing the brain to work harder to stay oriented. The result is brittle performance. When conditions are ideal, optimized systems feel powerful. When conditions drift, fatigue, complexity, novelty, they collapse quickly. This is why productivity culture became obsessed with hustle. Because the systems themselves stopped supporting sustained clarity, people were told to compensate with effort, grit, and endurance. Burnout wasn't a bug, it was the price of operating misaligned tools at scale. DualOperator challenges the core assumption behind optimization. Progress is not speed. Progress is reduced distortion. When the interaction shape is calibrated, shortcuts become optional. Automation becomes assistive, not overwhelming. AI becomes steerable instead of noisy. Performance rises because the system stops leaking effort. Optimization can only take you so far. Alignment is what lets improvement compound instead of collapse. Section 31. What a calibrated future actually feels like. A calibrated future doesn't feel futuristic. It feels quiet. You sit down to work, play, or create, and something subtle is missing. There's no immediate friction to push through, no warm-up period where you fight the system into behaving. Your hands settle, your eyes settle, your attention holds. You begin. In work, this means tasks stop fragmenting your mind. You're no longer bouncing between windows, modes, and micro-decisions just to maintain orientation. Navigation and action coexist. Adjustments happen without interruption. When you change direction, the system follows instead of resisting. Time stretches not because you're working longer, but because focus doesn't collapse as quickly. In creative work, intent feels closer to outcome. You do enter tools, you lean into them. Fine adjustments don't require ceremony. Exploration doesn't punish commitment. You can try, feel, correct, and continue without breaking flow. Mistakes stop feeling costly, they become information again. In gaming or performance environments, control stops feeling brittle. Precision doesn't demand tension. You're not bracing for failure at high speed, you're steering continuously. Awareness expands without overload. You can act and observe at the same time. The system doesn't distract you with itself. In learning, this changes everything. Beginners feel protected without being coddled. Experts feel challenged without being boxed in. Skill builds smoothly instead of spiking and stalling. Progress feels earned, not extracted. Most importantly, fatigue changes character. You still get tired, but it's honest tired. The kind that comes from doing meaningful work, not from translating intent through hostile systems. When you stop, you feel complete instead of scattered. This is the clearest signal of calibration. Not higher output. Not more features. But the absence of unnecessary resistance. People don't talk about the tools anymore. They talk about what they did with them. That's the future DualOperator points toward. Not louder systems. Not smarter systems shouting instructions. But systems that finally get out of the way and let humans stay whole while operating complexity. Section 32. Why this moment matters, and what happens if we don't change. We are at an inflection point. For decades, systems grew more powerful while humans quietly absorbed the cost of misalignment. We optimized speed, scale, and intelligence, and asked people to compensate with attention, endurance, and self-discipline. That bargain is breaking. Work is not getting harder, it is getting denser. Tools are not getting worse, they are getting louder. AI is not replacing humans, it is outpacing their ability to steer. The cracks are everywhere. Burnout normalized as ambition. Fatigue mistaken for weakness. Focus treated as a personal failing. Learning curves flattening earlier than they should. These are not cultural problems. They are interface problems. If we continue on the current path, smarter systems will not free people. They will overwhelm them. More automation will remove feedback. Mori optimization will amplify brittleness. Mori intelligence will collide with unchanged input channels. The result is predictable. Higher output for shorter spans. Sharper peaks and deeper crashes. Fewer people able to operate complexity without exhaustion. This is not sustainable. The alternative is not nostalgia or retreat. It is recalibration. We must stop asking humans to adapt endlessly to systems that refuse to adapt to them. We must stop treating misalignment as a character flaw. We must stop confusing endurance with progress. DualOperator exists because this moment demands a correction. Not a feature. Not a productivity hack. A shift in how systems relate to human bodies and nervous systems. The future will not belong to those who work the hardest. It will belong to those who remain clear the longest. Clarity comes from alignment. Alignment comes from calibration. This is not optional anymore. The cost of doing nothing is not stagnation. It is attrition. People burning out earlier. Mastery becoming rarer. Complexity becoming hostile instead of empowering. This is the moment to choose a different path. One where tools respect human motion. One where intelligence is steerable. One where effort maps cleanly to outcome. Not because it's idealistic, but because it's the only way forward that doesn't consume the people it claims to empower. That's the line in the sand. Closing keynote: the cost of misalignment. We need to talk about something everyone feels, and almost no one can name. Modern work feels harder than it should. Not harder in the sense of difficulty. Harder in the sense of drain. People sit in chairs. They move mice. They type on keyboards. And at the end of the day, they feel exhausted in a way that doesn't match the effort they put in. That confusion matters. Because when exhaustion doesn't make sense, people blame themselves. They assume they're losing focus. Losing discipline. Losing capacity. They're not. What's draining them is constant, invisible friction. Modern systems quietly demand endless microcorrections. Recentering attention, relocating cursors, switching modes, translating intent into symbols, fighting edges and corners. None of it feels meaningful. None of it feels productive. And because this friction is invisible, we normalized it. Instead of questioning the shape of our tools, we optimized them. We made them faster, smarter, denser, louder. Mori shortcuts. Mori automation. Mori AI. For a while it felt like progress. But optimization didn't remove friction. It amplified throughput through the same misalignment. The systems got faster at asking the human nervous system to compensate. So output spiked, then plateaued, then collapsed into fatigue. That's why so many people say, I can do more than ever, and I'm more tired than ever. This is the lie of modern productivity. Speed without alignment doesn't free people. It consumes them. And now we're at a turning point. AI is getting smarter. Systems are getting more capable. Possibility space is exploding. But the human ability to steer hasn't changed. The bottleneck isn't intelligence. It's control. If we keep pouring intelligence into misaligned interfaces, we don't get empowerment, we get overwhelm. Mori options, Mori decisions, Mori noise through the same narrow input channels. That path leads somewhere predictable. Shorter peak performance, earlier burnout, fewer people able to operate complexity without exhaustion. That's not a cultural failure. That's an interface failure. The alternative is not working harder. It's recalibration. A future where systems stop fighting the body. Where tools respect how humans actually move, see and decide. Where effort maps cleanly to outcome. In a calibrated system. Focus lasts longer. Mistakes become information. Precision doesn't require tension. Fatigue is honest, not corrosive. People stop talking about the tools. and start talking about what they built, learned, or achieved. That's the future DualOperator points toward. Not louder systems, not smarter systems shouting instructions, but systems that finally get out of the way. Because the future will not belong to those who work the hardest. It will belong to those who remain clear the longest. Clarity comes from alignment. Alignment comes from calibration. And that choice, to keep forcing humans to adapt, or finally adapting systems to humans, is the line we're standing on now. Thank you. Where we are now. You've completed 120 Right Arrow Manifesto Foundation. Where we are now. You've completed 120 Right Arrow Manifesto Foundation. 21-24 Right Arrow Neuroscience Cap. 25-28 Right Arrow AI Mastery Calibration Invention Summary. 29-32 Right Arrow Human Impact plus Closing Keynote. That's a full arc. The next sections should open the next chapter, not repeat. The strongest next arc, 33-36. I'm going to take initiative and lock this in, because this is the natural progression. 33 From concept to instrument. Right arrow why DualOperator is not a product, but a new class of tool. 34 Why geometry is a first-class input parameter. Right arrow shape as signal, not decoration. This is where circle logic becomes unavoidable. 35 The operator loop, human left-right arrow system left-right arrow feedback. Right arrow how DualOperator changes the control loop itself. 36 What this enables that was impossible before. Right arrow new workflows, new playstyles, new forms of mastery. I'll start section 33 now, full weight, same tone as before. Section 33, From concept to instrument. There's a difference between an idea and an instrument. Ideas explain. Instruments change behavior. Most technology products are ideas dressed as tools. They introduce features, options, and abstractions, then ask the user to adapt. Learning them feels like memorization. Mastery feels like compliance. Instruments are different. A true instrument disappears in use. It does not demand explanation. It teaches through feedback. It responds proportionally. It allows error without punishment and precision without strain. Dual operator is not a new interface concept. It is an instrument. That distinction matters because instruments are judged by a different standard. Not by how impressive they look, but by how they behave under sustained use. Not by how fast a beginner can click, but by how long an expert can remain clear. An instrument must scale with the human nervous system. It must preserve continuity under speed, remain truthful under precision, absorb variation without distortion, reward calibration instead of endurance. This is why geometry matters here. Rectangles are fine for documents and manufacturing. They are poor instruments. They introduce corners where none exist in the body. They force discontinuities where motion wants continuity. They turn space into rules instead of gradients. Dual operator treats shape as functional, not aesthetic. Circular visual fields, radial organization, and continuous boundaries are not stylistic choices. They are how instruments behave when designed for humans instead of grids. This is the shift. From software that must be learned, to tools that must be inhabited, from interfaces that ask questions, to instruments that answer movement. Once you see dual operator this way, the rest becomes obvious. It's not competing with monitors. It's not replacing mice. It's redefining the relationship between human intent and system response. And instruments, once proven, don't need persuasion. They spread because people feel the difference. Section 34, Why geometry is a first-class input parameter. For most of computing history, geometry was treated as decoration. Screen shape was considered a manufacturing constraint. Window shape was a UI convention. Cursor behavior was an afterthought. Function lived in code. Shape was just how it looked. This assumption quietly limited everything. The human nervous system does not experience geometry as decoration. It experiences it as instruction. Shape tells the body how to move, how to anticipate, where effort will go, and how correction will feel. In the physical world, this is obvious. A rounded tool invites rotation. A straight handle invites translation. A sharp corner signals stop. A curve signals continuation. You don't need training to understand this. Your body reads it instantly. Computing ignored this truth. Rectangles became dominant not because they were correct, but because they were easy to align, tile, and manufacture. Over time, software adapted to the rectangle and humans adapted in turn, absorbing the mismatch through constant microcorrection. That adaptation had a cost. Corners became traps. Edges became boundaries. Motion became discontinuous. Correction became constant. Geometry was silently shaping behavior, just badly. This is why geometry must be treated as a first-class input parameter, not a cosmetic layer. Input is not just buttons and sensors. Input is how space itself responds to motion. When geometry changes, the control loop changes. A circular boundary does not demand breaking. A rectangular boundary does. A radial layout does not privilege direction. A grid does. These differences are not subtle to the nervous system. They change how intent is expressed before any code runs. Dual operator treats geometry as signal. The circular field is not a display choice. It is an input surface for attention. It tells the eye and hand that motion may continue, that direction is relative, that correction will be smooth. Flat edges still exist where systems require them, not because they are ideal, but because compatibility matters. Geometry becomes layered, curved where humans operate, flat where legacy software lives. This layering is intentional. It acknowledges a truth most systems avoid. Humans and computers evolved different spatial instincts. The job of an interface is not to force one to dominate the other, it is to mediate honestly between them. Once geometry is treated as input, new behaviors become possible without adding complexity. Cursor motion becomes predictable. Focus becomes stable. Precision becomes cheaper. Fatigue becomes slower. Not because the user is better, but because the system stopped lying about space. This is the ceiling geometry imposed for decades. And once it's removed, the rest of computing finally has room to breathe. Section 35, the operator loop, how control actually works. Every system, no matter how advanced, is governed by a simple loop. Intent right arrow, action right arrow, feedback right arrow, correction. This is the operator loop. All performance, mastery, and fatigue live inside it. Most modern systems break this loop without realizing it. They separate intent from action with menus. They delay feedback with abstraction. They punish correction with friction. The loop stretches, deforms, and eventually collapses under load. When that happens, users compensate. They anticipate errors, over-control motion, slow themselves down, or disengage entirely. The loop no longer teaches, it demands vigilance. That's where exhaustion comes from. A healthy operator loop has three properties. Continuity. Action flows without forced stops. Motion does not collide with geometry. Intent is not interrupted to declare state. Proportionality. Small intent produces small change. Large intent produces large change. Nothing jumps, snaps, or surprises. Immediate feedback. The system responds fast enough that the brain learns in real time, not after the fact. Traditional interfaces violate all three. Corners break continuity. Modes break proportionality. Abstraction delays feedback. DualOperator rebuilds the loop from the ground up. The Anole expresses intent as bias, pressure, and angle, not just displacement. The circular visual field receives that intent without corners or traps. Radial organization preserves proportionality across scale. Dynamic centers absorb drift instead of forcing recentering. Feedback becomes felt, not interpreted. The operator no longer watches the system to see what it did. They sense it immediately. This changes how learning happens. Errors become gentle. Correction becomes cheap. Exploration becomes safe. The loop tightens. As the loop tightens, something important happens. Control shifts from conscious supervision to embodied skill. You stop thinking about the interface. You start thinking through it. This is the difference between driving a car and piloting a menu. Most systems never allow users to fully inhabit the loop. They keep people hovering above it, clicking, confirming, checking, correcting. DualOperator lets the operator drop inside the loop and stay there. That's why fatigue slows. That's why mastery stabilizes. That's why complexity becomes navigable instead of hostile. Nothing magical happened. The loop was restored. Section 36. What becomes possible once the loop is restored? When the operator loop stops leaking effort, the question changes. It's no longer, how do we make this faster? It becomes what could never exist before because the loop couldn't support it. Most systems today are constrained not by computing power, but by how fragile the control loop is under load. Designers avoid ideas not because they're impossible, but because they would overwhelm users. Complexity is rationed, features are hidden, possibility is clipped to preserve usability. That ceiling disappears when the loop is restored. The first thing that becomes possible is sustained parallel control. Not multitasking in the shallow sense, but true simultaneity. Acting while observing, adjusting while navigating, managing without micromanaging. The operator no longer has to collapse awareness into a single focal point just to remain stable. This unlocks workflows where multiple entities are controlled fluidly. Oversight and execution coexist. Attention expands without fragmenting. These weren't missing features. They were impossible states. The second thing that becomes possible is precision without tension. High-speed systems today demand bracing, mental or physical, to avoid failure. That tension limits duration and learning. When correction becomes cheap and feedback becomes continuous, precision stops being stressful. This enables longer peak performance windows, deeper learning curves, mastery that doesn't burn out its own operators. Skill no longer spikes and collapses. It compounds. The third thing that becomes possible is adaptive systems that don't steal agency. When the loop is tight, systems can assist without taking over. Adaptation doesn't feel like automation, it feels like support. The operator remains in control because feedback never disappears. This is the missing requirement for humane AI, complex orchestration tools, and future control environments. Intelligence can finally be steered. The fourth thing that becomes possible is interfaces that teach instead of punish. When the loop is intact, systems no longer need guardrails everywhere. Users learn through interaction, not instruction. Errors inform instead of penalize. Confidence grows naturally. This changes who can operate complex systems and how early. The final thing that becomes possible is clarity at scale. As systems grow more complex, the natural assumption has been that humans must become specialists or step aside entirely. Restoring the operator loop offers a different path, complexity that remains inhabitable. Not because humans got smarter, but because systems stopped demanding invisible labor. This is the real outcome of DualOperator. Not a better device. Not a clever interface. A future where complexity no longer requires sacrifice. Where mastery is sustainable. Where intelligence is steerable. Where effort maps honestly to outcome. Once the loop is restored, we stop asking what humans can endure and start asking what they can build. That's the horizon. Lad. Here are the core claims. Extracted cleanly. System. Lad, here are the core claims. Extracted cleanly and structured, so they can be reused for patent positioning, investor decks, press, or internal doctrine. No fluff, each claim is atomic and defensible. Core claims, dual operator system. One geometry is an active input parameter. Traditional systems treat screen and interface geometry as passive containers. Dual operator asserts that geometry directly shapes human motor behavior, attention, and correction cost, and must therefore be treated as a first-class input parameter. Curved boundaries reduce braking and correction. Corners introduce friction and cognitive load. Geometry influences intent expression before software logic executes. Two rectangular interfaces impose hidden cognitive tax. Rectangular, corner-dominated interfaces force users into continuous microcorrections that silently consume neural bandwidth. This tax accumulates over time. It manifests as fatigue, plateau, and burnout. It disproportionately affects skilled users operating near precision limits. 3 productivity caps are neurological, not motivational. Human performance ceilings arise from saturation of correction, translation, and context-switching load, not lack of discipline or effort. Optimization within misaligned systems accelerates failure. More speed, shortcuts, or automation cannot bypass neural throughput limits. Breaking the cap requires reshaping interaction, not refining it. 4. Single-channel input is a structural bottleneck. Modern interfaces force parallel human cognition through serial control paths. One hand, one cursor, one action stream. Context switching incurs neurological reset costs. Expertise reduces error, but cannot widen a saturated channel. Dual interfacing restores parallel control bandwidth, aligned with human cognition. 5. Modes are a design failure, not a feature. Modes exist because systems cannot infer intent. They interrupt flow. They increase translation overhead. They punish users for forgetting invisible states. Radial task states replace explicit modes by allowing spatial scope and pressure to express intent continuously. 6. Input and output must share the same language. Mismatch between how intent is expressed, curves, bias, pressure, and how systems receive it, grids, snapping, corners, creates translation loss. Precision degrades. Fatigue accelerates. Mastery becomes brittle. DualOperator aligns input expression and visual response through arc-based geometry and continuous boundaries. 7. Dual displays must behave as one field. Adding screens without preserving continuity increases fragmentation. Seams disrupt attention. Cursor loss increases correction cost. Head and eye movement escalate fatigue. DualOperator treats multiple displays as a unified motion surface rather than discrete destinations. 8. Circular visual fields reduce correction without sacrificing compatibility. Primarily circular interaction regions eliminate corner traps, while flat boundary regions preserve compatibility with existing operating systems. Circular where humans operate. Flat where legacy software requires it. No need to replace applications or OS kernels. 9. The operator loop determines performance. All control systems are governed by the loop. Intent right arrow, action right arrow, feedback right arrow, correction. When this loop is broken, users compensate. Vigilance replaces skill. Fatigue replaces learning. DualOperator restores loop continuity, proportionality, and immediacy. 10. Fatigue is a signal, not an error. Increased correction, hesitation, and grip pressure indicate fatigue, not incompetence. Punishing fatigue accelerates failure. Supporting fatigue preserves precision. Adaptive systems should reduce noise when effort rises, without intent escalation. 11. Experts plateau first because tools fail them first. As expertise increases, movements shrink. Timing tightens. Correction cost dominates. Misaligned tools cannot scale with expert precision. DualOperator allows mastery to continue compounding instead of collapsing. 12. Smarter AI does not solve the steering problem. AI expands possibility space faster than humans can steer through serial interfaces. More options not equal to more control. Automation without feedback breaks calibration. Better input is required before smarter AI can be effectively directed. 13. Calibration is the unifying principle. Calibration is the removal of distortion between intent and outcome. Not comfort. Not automation. Not simplification. Calibrated systems preserve truth across skill levels, fatigue states, and complexity. 14. DualOperator is an instrument, not an interface. An instrument disappears in use. Teaches through feedback. Scales with mastery. Preserves precision under load. Dual operator meets the criteria of an instrument by restoring a truthful operator loop. 15. Restoring the loop unlocks previously impossible systems. When the operator loop is restored, parallel control becomes viable. Precision no longer requires tension. Adaptive systems remain humane. Complexity becomes inhabitable. These were not missing features, they were unsupported states. One-sentence core claim, master line. Dual operator is a geometry-aware human, machine control system that restores the operator loop by aligning input, visual space and feedback with human motor and cognitive behavior, breaking productivity caps imposed by misaligned interfaces. Here's the final transition section. This is written to hand the audience cleanly from vision right arrow law right arrow substance, and to justify why you're about to read the patent word for word. Section 37, from vision to record why the patent matters. Everything you've heard up to this point has been about alignment. Alignment between human motion and system response. Alignment between intent and outcome. Alignment between what people feel is wrong and what actually is. Up until now, we've spoken in human terms. Experience, fatigue, mastery, clarity, control. But ideas don't change the world on their own. They become real when they are frozen into structure. That's what a patent is. A patent is not marketing. It's not philosophy. It's not aspiration. It is a technical record that says, this system exists, this problem is real, and this is how it is solved. What you're about to hear is not a pitch. It's not a summary. It's not an interpretation. It's the exact language used to lock these ideas into reality. Geometry, dual monitors, circular fields, flat boundaries, modular arrangements, and compatibility with existing systems. Word for word. Because if this system is going to challenge decades of assumptions about screens, input, and control, it has to stand on something firmer than vibes. It has to stand on precision. Reading the patent verbatim isn't about flexing legal language. It's about showing that this isn't hypothetical. It isn't sci-fi. It isn't a mood board. It's implementable. It's defensible. It's real. So as you listen, don't try to visualize a product. Listen for structure. Listen for constraints. Listen for how the ideas we've discussed are translated into exact terms that engineers, manufacturers, and systems can actually build. This is where vision becomes record, where intuition becomes specification, where alignment becomes enforceable. From here on, there's no interpretation. Just the text. Pause. Now I'm going to read the dual monitor patent word for word. Take your time. Let it land. Bless up lasses, Lassingtons, lads, Laddingtons, Brubs and Brubbingtons. Section 1, Title of the Invention. Geometry-aware display system and operating environment for reduced cognitive load, and modular multi-display integration. Section 2, Field of the Invention. The present invention relates generally to human, computer interface systems, and more specifically to display systems, display geometries, and operating environment layers configured to improve visual organization, cursor interaction, and multi-display integration. The invention pertains to non-rectangular display geometries and geometry-aware operating environments that operate on or in conjunction with existing operating systems. The disclosed systems are directed toward reducing cognitive load, improving cursor tracking, and minimizing visual and attentional confusion associated with conventional rectangular display hierarchies and asymmetric multi-monitor arrangements. The invention further relates to modular display configurations, including single display, multi-display, and tessellated display arrangements, wherein adjacent display modules are geometrically configured to fit together with minimal visual discontinuity. In certain embodiments, the invention is particularly suited for use with articulated, ambidextrous, or precision-oriented input devices, though it is not limited to any specific input mechanism. Applications of the invention include, but are not limited to, training and simulation environments, creative and technical workstations, gaming and interactive systems, accessibility-focused interfaces, and command or monitoring displays, wherein sustained focus, reduced cognitive overhead, and predictable cursor behavior are desirable. Section 3. Background of the invention. Contemporary computing environments are overwhelmingly designed around rectangular display geometries and corresponding interface hierarchies. Rectangular screens establish corners, edges, and linear boundaries that implicitly dictate how information is arranged, how cursors behave, and how user attention is distributed. While such geometries align with historical constraints of display manufacturing and early graphical user interface design, they do not necessarily align with the natural organization of human visual attention or fine motor articulation. In conventional display systems, corners and edges function as cognitive attractors, encouraging cursor snapping, window anchoring, and hierarchical prioritization of screen regions. In multi-display environments, these effects are amplified by the introduction of asymmetric layouts, primary, secondary monitor hierarchies, and visual discontinuities at monitor seams. As a result, users frequently experience increased cognitive load, cursor loss, attentional fragmentation, and unnecessary head and eye movement when operating across one or more displays. Attempts to address these issues have largely focused on software-based window management tools or increased screen area through ultra-wide or multi-monitor configurations. However, such approaches generally preserve the underlying rectangular assumptions and therefore inherit the same limitations. In particular, expanding rectangular displays laterally tends to increase the distance between focal regions, exacerbating attentional switching costs rather than reducing them. Separately, conventional mouse input devices are predominantly designed around palm-supported, translational motion, encouraging large, continuous movements of the hand, wrist, or arm across a planar surface. This style of input prioritizes gross motion over fine articulation and often relies on index finger actuation for primary actions. While effective for basic pointing tasks, palm-driven input can reduce precision, increase fatigue, and introduce unintended cursor motion, particularly during extended sessions or tasks requiring sustained accuracy. In contrast, articulated input techniques that emphasize pinch-based stabilization and webbing-supported control promote tighter, more intentional motion patterns derived from fine finger articulation rather than gross arm movement. However, existing display geometries and operating environments are not structured to complement such input behaviors. Rectangular boundaries, corner-based snapping, and linear cursor dynamics can conflict with articulated motion, amplifying noise rather than leveraging precision. Further, irrespective of the specific input device employed, human hand motion during pointing and navigation tasks is inherently arc-based and circular rather than rectilinear. Wrist rotation, forearm movement, and finger articulation naturally produce curved trajectories, even when a user intends to move a cursor along a nominally straight path. Rectangular display geometries impose artificial corner-based constraints that conflict with these circular motion patterns, increasing the likelihood of cursor loss, edge trapping, overshoot, and repeated corrective adjustments. As a result, users navigating rectangular display environments are required to continuously reconcile circular motor output with square visual constraints, introducing unnecessary correction cycles and attentional disruption. This effect is present across both palm-supported and articulated input modalities and becomes more pronounced as display size, resolution, or multi-display complexity increases. Additionally, while non-rectangular displays have been proposed or demonstrated in limited contexts, such designs have often lacked functional integration with existing operating systems, suffering from poor compatibility with standard interface elements such as taskbars, menus, and system notifications. As a result, non-rectangular displays have largely remained novelty implementations rather than practical, low-friction alternatives to conventional monitors. There therefore exists a need for a display system and operating environment that departs from rigid rectangular hierarchies while maintaining compatibility with existing operating systems, that supports predictable cursor behavior and reduced visual confusion, and that enables modular, geometrically coherent multi-display arrangements. Such a system should be capable of operating with both palm-supported and articulated input modalities, support single and multi-display configurations, and reduce cognitive load through intentional alignment of display geometry, cursor dynamics, and visual organization. Section 4, Summary of the invention. The present invention provides a geometry-aware display system and operating environment configured to reduce cognitive load, improve cursor predictability, and enable modular multi-display arrangements through intentional alignment of display geometry, visual organization, and interaction behavior. In one aspect, the invention comprises one or more non-rectangular display modules, defining a primarily circular visual field, while incorporating at least one substantially flat boundary region. The flat boundary region is configured to preserve compatibility with existing operating system interface elements, including taskbars, menus, notifications, and system-level controls, while the circular visual field reduces corner-based visual artifacts and conflicts with natural arc-based cursor motion. In certain embodiments, the display system supports modular geometric fitting between adjacent display modules. Individual circular display modules may be arranged singly or in combination with one or more additional modules, such that flat boundary regions are positioned in direct adjacency, minimizing visual discontinuity and reducing attentional disruption across display seams. Symmetric arrangements, including paired left-right configurations, are supported in preferred embodiments, though symmetry is not required for operation of the invention. In further embodiments, the system includes an intermediary polygonal connector display module, having a plurality of flat boundary regions configured to receive adjacent circular display modules. The connector module may define a hexagonal, octagonal, or other polygonal geometry, enabling radial expansion of the display system in a flower-like arrangement while maintaining tight geometric fit and controlled visual spacing. Practical configurations may include 2 to 4 circular display modules, though additional arrangements are contemplated. In another aspect, the invention includes a geometry-aware operating environment layer configured to operate on or in conjunction with existing operating systems without requiring modification of the underlying kernel. The operating environment layer detects display geometry and modifies cursor behavior, window placement, and interaction dynamics as a function of the non-rectangular visual field. In particular, cursor motion may be conditioned to reduce loss at boundaries, minimize edge trapping, and support predictable navigation within circular display regions, while preserving conventional behavior at flat boundary regions. The operating environment layer may further define radial interaction zones, center-weighted focus regions, and geometry-consistent windowing behaviors that reduce reliance on corner-based snapping and hierarchical rectangular layouts. These behaviors are intended to reduce attentional fragmentation, decrease corrective cursor motion, and support sustained focus during extended interaction. In certain embodiments, the display system and operating environment are particularly suited for use with articulated, ambidextrous, or precision-oriented input devices, including input modalities that emphasize circular or arc-based motion derived from finger articulation and webbing-supported stabilization. However, the invention is not limited to any specific input mechanism and may be used with conventional pointing devices. In additional embodiments, the operating environment may function as a training or simulation environment, enabling users to develop spatial awareness, cursor control, and ambidextrous interaction skills within the geometry-aware display system, with such skills transferable to conventional display environments. Advantageously, the disclosed system departs from rigid rectangular hierarchies while preserving compatibility with existing software ecosystems, enabling practical adoption without requiring replacement of established operating systems or applications. By aligning display geometry, cursor dynamics, and visual organization with natural human motion and attention patterns, the invention provides a modular, extensible display platform configured to reduce cognitive load and improve interaction coherence across single and multi-display environments. Section 5, Brief description of the drawings. The accompanying drawings, when provided, are included to illustrate representative embodiments of the invention and to assist in understanding the principles disclosed herein. The drawings are illustrative rather than limiting, and like reference numerals when used, refer to like elements throughout. Fig. 1 illustrates a perspective view of a non-rectangular display module, defining a generally circular visual field with at least one substantially flat boundary region configured for operating system interface compatibility. Fig. 2 illustrates a display system comprising a circular display module positioned adjacent to a rectangular display, wherein the flat boundary region of the circular display aligns with the rectangular display to form an extended visual workspace. Fig. 3 illustrates a multi-display arrangement comprising two circular display modules, positioned such that flat boundary regions are placed in direct adjacency, forming a paired configuration with reduced visual discontinuity. Fig. 4 illustrates an embodiment including an intermediary polygonal connector display module having a plurality of flat boundary regions, with multiple circular display modules attached thereto in a radial, flower-like arrangement. Fig. 5 illustrates an example geometry-aware operating environment layer interacting with a non-rectangular display module, including representative cursor, behavior, and window placement within a circular visual field. Fig. 6 illustrates exemplary radial interaction zones defined within a circular display region, including center-weighted focus regions and peripheral contextual regions. Fig. 7 illustrates an example multi-display system configured for ambidextrous interaction, wherein multiple display modules are arranged to support balanced left, right visual attention. Section 6. Detailed description of the invention. 6.1 Display geometry and visual field definition. In one or more embodiments, the invention comprises a display module defining a non-rectangular visual field, wherein the visible display area is primarily circular in form, while incorporating at least one substantially flat boundary region. The circular portion of the visual field is configured to reduce corner-based visual artifacts and to align with natural arc-based cursor motion and visual attention patterns, while the flat boundary region provides functional compatibility with existing operating system interface elements. The circular visual field may define a continuous perimeter free of angular corners, thereby reducing cursor trapping, overshoot, and loss commonly associated with rectangular display edges. The curvature of the visual field is configured to support predictable cursor navigation and visual scanning, consistent with circular or arcuate motor motion produced by human wrist rotation, forearm movement, and finger articulation. The flat boundary region is positioned along a lower portion of the display module in preferred embodiments, though alternative orientations are contemplated. The flat boundary region is dimensioned and configured to accommodate system-level interface components, including but not limited to taskbars, application launch areas, notification regions, and menu systems provided by existing operating systems. In this manner, the display module preserves essential rectangular interface affordances, while departing from rigid rectangular hierarchies across the remainder of the visual field. The display module may be implemented using any suitable display technology, including but not limited to liquid crystal display, LCD, organic light-emitting diode OLED, microLED, or other emissive or transmissive display technologies. The non-rectangular visual field may be achieved through physical panel shaping, masking, selective pixel activation, bezel design, or combinations thereof. In certain embodiments, the display module includes mounting, housing, or bezel structures configured to maintain the circular visual field and flat boundary region as an integrated unit. The display geometry is not purely ornamental, but is configured to produce functional interaction effects, including reduced visual confusion, improved cursor predictability, and decreased reliance on corner-based interface behaviors. Variations in the precise curvature, diameter, flat boundary width, and proportional relationships between the circular and flat regions are contemplated, provided that the display module maintains a predominantly circular visual field with at least one flat boundary region configured for interface compatibility and geometric adjacency with other display modules. 6.2 Modular display fitting and multi-display arrangements. In one or more embodiments, the display system is configured to support modular geometric fitting between multiple display modules, enabling single display, multi-display, and expanded display arrangements while maintaining visual continuity and reduced cognitive load. The modularity of the system is derived from the intentional geometry of each display module rather than reliance on software-only window management or arbitrary physical placement. Each display module defines at least one substantially flat boundary region, configured to align with a corresponding flat boundary region of another display module, or with a flat boundary of a different display surface. When positioned in adjacency, the flat boundary regions enable a tight, articulated fit that minimizes gaps, misalignment, and visual seams between displays. This geometric fitting reduces perceptual discontinuity and supports a unified visual workspace across multiple modules. In certain embodiments, two circular display modules may be arranged such that their respective flat boundary regions are placed in direct contact, forming a paired configuration. While such arrangements may be symmetric in preferred embodiments, symmetry is not required for operation of the invention. The primary functional requirement is that the display modules are geometrically configured to fit together in a predictable manner that preserves visual coherence and cursor continuity across display boundaries. In further embodiments, the display system includes an intermediary connector display module configured to facilitate expansion beyond two display modules. The connector display module defines a polygonal geometry having a plurality of flat boundary regions, each flat boundary region configured to receive an adjacent circular display module. By way of example, the connector display module may define a hexagonal geometry to receive up to 6 circular display modules, or an octagonal geometry to receive up to 8 circular display modules, though other polygonal configurations are contemplated. When assembled, circular display modules attach to the connector display module in a radial flower-like arrangement, with each circular module functioning as a petal extending outward from the central connector module. This arrangement enables expansion of the display system while maintaining consistent geometric relationships, controlled spacing, and reduced visual disruption between modules. Practical configurations may include 2 to 4 circular display modules attached to a single connector display module, though larger configurations are contemplated. The modular fitting approach of the invention contrasts with conventional multi-monitor arrangements that rely on arbitrary placement and rectangular alignment. By constraining how display modules fit together geometrically, the invention reduces the need for users to adapt to irregular seams, offset boundaries, or asymmetric layouts, thereby reducing attentional fragmentation and cursor confusion. The modular display system may further include mounting structures, alignment features, or mechanical guides configured to maintain relative positioning between adjacent display modules. Such structures may be integrated into display housings, mounting arms, or support frames, and are configured to preserve geometric alignment during normal use. Importantly, the modular multi-display arrangements described herein are configured to operate with existing operating systems and applications. The geometric fitting of display modules establishes a physical and visual foundation upon which geometry-aware operating environment behaviors may be applied, though such behaviors are not required for basic operation of the modular display system. 6. 3. Geometry-aware operating environment layer. In one or more embodiments, the invention includes a geometry-aware operating environment layer configured to operate on, or in conjunction with an existing operating system. The operating environment layer is not a replacement for the underlying operating system kernel and does not require modification of core system components. Instead, the operating environment layer functions as an interface shell, compositor, window management layer, or equivalent software construct that is aware of the non-rectangular display geometry and adapts interaction behavior accordingly. The geometry-aware operating environment layer detects the physical and logical geometry of one or more display modules, including circular visual fields, flat boundary regions, and modular multi-display arrangements. Based on this geometry, the operating environment layer modifies cursor behavior, window placement, focus transitions, and interaction dynamics as a function of display shape, rather than relying exclusively on rectangular coordinate assumptions. In particular, cursor behavior within circular visual fields may be conditioned to reduce loss at curved boundaries, minimize edge trapping, and avoid abrupt corner-based stopping behavior. Cursor motion may be smoothly decelerated or redirected as it approaches the curved perimeter of a circular display region, while maintaining conventional cursor behavior at flat boundary regions configured for operating system interface compatibility. This hybrid behavior preserves familiarity, where expected, while reducing corrective motion within circular regions. the operating environment layer may further define geometry-consistent windowing behaviors, wherein application windows, interface panels, and visual elements are positioned and constrained according to circular or radial regions rather than rectangular corners. For example, windows may preferentially occupy center-weighted regions of a circular display, arc-bounded regions near the perimeter, or other geometry-aligned zones that reduce reliance on corner snapping and hierarchical rectangular layouts. In modular multi-display arrangements, the operating environment layer may maintain cursor continuity and focus predictability across adjacent display modules. When a cursor transitions across a flat boundary region between two display modules, the operating environment layer preserves directional intent and spatial coherence, reducing disorientation commonly experienced at display seams. In configurations employing a polygonal connector display module, the operating environment layer may further account for radial relationships between attached circular display modules when determining cursor transitions and focus behavior. In certain embodiments, the operating environment layer defines radial interaction zones within circular display regions. Such zones may include center-weighted focus regions for primary interaction, intermediate regions for contextual or secondary information, and peripheral regions for ambient or reference content. These zones are configured to align with natural visual attention patterns and arc-based motor motion, reducing attentional fragmentation during extended use. The geometry-aware operating environment layer may be selectively enabled, disabled, or adjusted by the user and may coexist with conventional desktop environments. In some embodiments, the operating environment layer functions as a training or simulation environment, enabling users to develop spatial awareness, cursor control, and ambidextrous interaction skills within geometry-consistent visual fields, with such skills transferable to conventional rectangular display environments. Importantly, while the operating environment layer enhances the functional benefits of the non-rectangular display system, it is not required for basic operation of the display modules. The display system may operate as a standard display output device when the geometry-aware operating environment layer is not active, preserving broad compatibility with existing software ecosystems. 6.4 Cursor dynamics and boundary conditioning. In one or more embodiments, the invention implements geometry-conditioned cursor dynamics, configured to improve predictability, reduce loss, and minimize corrective motion within non-rectangular display environments. Cursor behavior is adapted as a function of display geometry, rather than relying solely on uniform rectangular coordinate assumptions. Within circular visual fields, cursor motion is conditioned to account for the curved perimeter of the display region. As the cursor approaches a curved boundary, its velocity, direction, or responsiveness may be modified to reduce abrupt stopping, edge trapping, or overshoot commonly associated with hard rectangular edges. Such conditioning may include smooth deceleration, directional biasing, or boundary-adjacent redirection that preserves user intent while preventing loss of the cursor beyond the visible region. Unlike conventional corner-based behavior, the curved boundary of the circular visual field provides a continuous perimeter free of angular discontinuities. The geometry-aware cursor dynamics leverage this continuity to reduce repeated corrective adjustments caused by corner collisions or abrupt directional changes. As a result, cursor motion within the circular region remains fluid and consistent with arc-based motor output produced by wrist rotation, forearm movement, and finger articulation. At flat boundary regions, cursor behavior may revert to or preserve conventional operating system behavior. This allows system-level interface elements, including taskbars, menus, and system controls, to function as expected while maintaining compatibility with existing software paradigms. The transition between curved and flat boundary behavior is handled smoothly by the operating environment layer to avoid perceptual discontinuities or unexpected cursor responses. In modular multi-display arrangements, cursor dynamics are further conditioned to maintain spatial continuity across adjacent display modules. When transitioning across flat boundary regions between two circular display modules, the cursor maintains directional intent and relative position, reducing disorientation at display seams. In configurations employing a polygonal connector display module, cursor transitions may account for radial relationships between attached circular display modules, preserving intuitive navigation across the display topology. The geometry-conditioned cursor dynamics described herein are applicable across a range of input modalities, including palm-supported pointing devices, articulated pinch-based devices, and other precision-oriented input mechanisms. The conditioning does not impose fixed motion patterns, but instead reduces conflict between natural arc-based motor output and artificial square constraints, thereby decreasing unnecessary correction cycles. Advantageously, the cursor dynamics operate without requiring modification of application-level software and may be implemented entirely within the geometry-aware operating environment layer. When the operating environment layer is inactive, the cursor may revert to conventional behavior, preserving compatibility with standard operating system configurations. 6.5 Geometry-consistent windowing and interaction zones. In one or more embodiments, the invention provides geometry-consistent windowing behaviors configured to align application placement, interaction zones, and visual organization with non-rectangular display geometries. Rather than enforcing corner-based snapping and rectangular hierarchy assumptions, the operating environment layer positions and constrains visual elements in a manner consistent with circular visual fields and modular display arrangements. Within a circular display region, application windows, panels, and interface elements may be positioned according to radial or center-weighted placement rules. Primary interaction elements may preferentially occupy central regions of the display, where visual acuity and cursor precision are highest, while secondary or contextual elements may be positioned in peripheral or arc-bounded regions nearer the curved boundary. This distribution reduces visual clutter, minimizes attentional fragmentation, and decreases reliance on corner-based anchoring. The operating environment layer may define geometry-aligned interaction zones within the circular visual field. Such zones may include, but are not limited to, a central focus zone, intermediate contextual zones, and peripheral reference zones. These zones are configured to reflect natural patterns of visual attention and to support predictable navigation without requiring users to adapt to artificial rectangular partitions. Window resizing and repositioning operations may be constrained or guided by the geometry of the display. For example, windows may expand or contract along curved boundaries, snap to radial alignments, or conform to arc-defined limits rather than rectangular edges. These behaviors reduce window overlap, accidental occlusion, and the need for frequent manual adjustments during extended interaction. At flat boundary regions configured for operating system compatibility, conventional windowing behaviors may be preserved. System-level interface components, such as taskbars, menus, and application launch regions, may remain anchored to flat boundary regions, enabling users to access familiar controls without disrupting geometry-consistent interaction within the circular visual field. The operating environment layer manages transitions between flat boundary behaviors and circular region behaviors to maintain continuity and predictability. In modular multi-display arrangements, geometry-consistent windowing behaviors may extend across adjacent display modules. Windows may be constrained to individual circular display regions or permitted to span multiple regions, depending on user preference and system configuration. When spanning is permitted, the operating environment layer accounts for curved boundaries and flat adjacency regions to maintain legibility and reduce perceptual distortion across display seams. The geometry-consistent windowing and interaction zones described herein are configured to operate without requiring modification of application software. Applications designed for rectangular display environments may be presented within geometry-aligned regions, masked or constrained as necessary by the operating environment layer, thereby preserving compatibility with existing software ecosystems while enabling the functional benefits of non-rectangular display geometry. 6.6 Ambidextrous and precision-oriented interaction support. In one or more embodiments, the display system and geometry-aware operating environment are configured to support ambidextrous interaction and precision-oriented control by reducing asymmetry, hierarchy bias, and directional dominance commonly present in conventional rectangular display environments. The non-rectangular visual fields and modular display arrangements enable balanced visual attention and interaction across left and right regions of the workspace. The circular visual field inherently lacks directional corners and dominant axes, allowing interaction to be distributed more evenly across the display surface. This symmetry supports ambidextrous use by minimizing visual cues that bias interaction toward a particular side of the display. In multi-display arrangements, particularly those employing paired circular display modules or radially arranged configurations, the system enables balanced left-right interaction without designating a primary or secondary display by default. The geometry-aware operating environment layer may further support ambidextrous interaction by maintaining consistent cursor dynamics, windowing behaviors, and interaction zones regardless of which hand or input modality is used. Cursor behavior, focus transitions, and window placement remain predictable across the display topology, reducing the cognitive overhead associated with switching hands or interaction styles. In certain embodiments, the display system and operating environment are particularly suited for precision-oriented input modalities, including articulated, pinch-based, or webbing-supported control techniques that emphasize fine motor articulation and circular or arc-based motion. The circular display geometry reduces conflict between such motion patterns and visual boundaries, allowing precision input to be expressed without excessive corrective movement or boundary-induced disruption. The system may further function as a training and skill development environment, wherein users develop spatial awareness, cursor control, and ambidextrous coordination within geometry-consistent visual fields. Through repeated use, users may acquire interaction skills that transfer to conventional rectangular display environments, improving precision, confidence, and reduced cognitive load, even when operating outside the geometry-aware system. Importantly, while the display system and operating environment provide advantages for ambidextrous and precision-oriented interaction, the invention does not require any specific input device or interaction technique. Conventional pointing devices, keyboards, controllers, or other input mechanisms may be used without limitation. The benefits described herein arise from the alignment of display geometry and interaction behavior with natural human motion and attention patterns, rather than reliance on specialized hardware. 6.7 Training, simulation, and skill transfer environments. In one or more embodiments, the geometry-aware display system and operating environment are configured to function as a training and simulation environment for developing interaction skills associated with precision, spatial awareness, and reduced cognitive load. The non-rectangular display geometry, geometry-conditioned cursor dynamics, and geometry-consistent windowing behaviors provide a controlled interaction space in which users may practice and refine motor control and attentional coordination. The circular visual fields and modular display arrangements reduce reliance on corner-based visual anchors and hierarchical rectangular layouts, encouraging users to develop interaction strategies aligned with arc-based motion and center-weighted focus. Over time, such interaction patterns may improve cursor predictability, decrease corrective movement, and enhance confidence during precision-oriented tasks. In certain embodiments, the operating environment layer may be configured to support guided training modes, progressive interaction challenges, or constrained workspaces that emphasize ambidextrous use, controlled cursor motion, or sustained focus. These training configurations may be selectively enabled or disabled and are not required for general operation of the display system. Importantly, skills developed within the geometry-aware training environment are transferable to conventional rectangular display environments. By reducing noise introduced by corner conflicts and artificial boundaries during training, users may acquire improved motor articulation, spatial intuition, and attentional discipline that persists when interacting with standard operating systems and display geometries. The training and simulation aspects of the invention are intended as functional extensions of the display system and operating environment rather than as mandatory modes of operation. Users may engage the system purely as a productivity or interaction platform, or alternatively leverage its geometry-aware properties as a structured environment for skill development, experimentation, or rehabilitation. Advantageously, the ability to operate both as a practical display system and as a training environment enables the invention to support a wide range of use cases, including creative workflows, technical tasks, gaming and simulation, accessibility-focused interaction, and professional or educational applications. 6.8 Compatibility, variations, and alternative embodiments. The systems and methods described herein are intended to be broadly compatible with existing hardware, software, and operating system ecosystems. The geometry-aware display system may operate with conventional computing devices, graphics processing units, display controllers, and input peripherals without requiring specialized drivers, kernel modifications, or application-level changes. The non-rectangular visual fields described herein may be implemented using a variety of techniques, including but not limited to physically shaped display panels, masked rectangular panels, selective pixel activation, software-defined display regions, bezel shaping, or combinations thereof. The precise implementation method does not limit the scope of the invention, provided that the resulting display geometry defines a predominantly circular visual field with at least one flat boundary region configured for interface compatibility and geometric adjacency. While preferred embodiments describe circular display modules with a single flat boundary region, alternative embodiments may include variations in curvature, diameter, aspect ratio, or flat boundary dimensions. In some embodiments, multiple flat boundary regions may be provided on a single display module to support different fitting arrangements or mounting orientations. Partial circular, elliptical, or arcuate visual fields are also contemplated, provided that the geometry remains free of angular corners across the majority of the display perimeter. The intermediary connector display module may define a variety of polygonal geometries, including hexagonal, octagonal, or other multi-sided configurations. The number, orientation, and spacing of flat boundary regions may vary depending on desired expansion capacity, ergonomic considerations, or spatial constraints. While practical configurations may include 2 to 4 circular display modules, the invention is not limited to a specific number of modules or arrangement. The geometry-aware operating environment layer may be implemented using a wide range of software architectures, including window managers, compositors, overlays, shells, or hybrid systems. The operating environment layer may run locally, remotely, or in a virtualized environment, and may coexist with conventional desktop environments. Features described herein may be selectively enabled, disabled, or adjusted based on user preference, system capability, or application context. The invention is not limited to any particular input modality. While certain embodiments are particularly suited for articulated, ambidextrous, or precision-oriented input techniques, the display system may be used with conventional mice, keyboards, controllers, touch input, stylus input, eye tracking, or other interaction mechanisms. The functional benefits arise from the alignment of display geometry and interaction behavior rather than reliance on specialized input hardware. The disclosed system may be employed across a wide range of applications, including but not limited to productivity workstations, creative environments, gaming and simulation systems, accessibility-focused interfaces, educational platforms, command and control displays, and research or experimental interaction spaces. It will be appreciated that the embodiments described herein are illustrative rather than limiting. Modifications, substitutions, and variations may be made without departing from the spirit and scope of the invention, as defined by the appended claims and equivalents thereof. 6.9 Advantages and technical effects. The geometry-aware display system and operating environment described herein provide a number of technical advantages and functional effects over conventional rectangular display systems and arbitrary multi-monitor arrangements. By employing a predominantly circular visual field free of angular corners, the display system reduces cursor loss, edge trapping, and repeated corrective motion associated with rectangular boundaries. The curved perimeter aligns with natural arc-based motor output produced by wrist rotation, forearm movement, and finger articulation, resulting in smoother cursor navigation and improved predictability during pointing and selection tasks. The inclusion of at least one substantially flat boundary region enables continued compatibility with existing operating system interface elements, while avoiding the imposition of rectangular hierarchy across the entire visual field. This hybrid geometry preserves access to familiar system controls while reducing visual and attentional artifacts within the primary interaction region. Modular geometric fitting between display modules provides a structured alternative to conventional multi-monitor arrangements. By constraining how displays fit together through complementary boundary regions, the invention minimizes visual discontinuities, reduces asymmetric layout bias, and supports coherent cursor transitions across display seams. The use of intermediary polygonal connector display modules further enables controlled expansion of the display system while maintaining consistent geometric relationships and reduced spatial fragmentation. The geometry-aware operating environment layer enhances these effects by conditioning cursor dynamics, window placement, and interaction behavior as a function of display geometry. These behaviors operate without requiring modification of application software or operating system kernels, preserving broad compatibility while enabling functional improvements in usability and interaction coherence. In addition, the disclosed system supports ambidextrous and precision-oriented interaction by reducing directional dominance and hierarchical bias inherent in rectangular display layouts. Balanced visual organization and geometry-consistent interaction zones facilitate sustained focus and reduced cognitive overhead during extended use. When employed as a training or simulation environment, the system enables users to develop interaction skills aligned with geometry-consistent visual fields, including improved spatial awareness, controlled cursor motion, and ambidextrous coordination. Such skills are transferable to conventional display environments, providing lasting benefits beyond use of the system itself. Collectively, these advantages arise from the intentional alignment of display geometry, modular physical arrangement, and geometry-aware interaction behavior. The invention thereby provides a practical, extensible display platform configured to reduce cognitive load, improve interaction predictability, and support coherent multi-display environments without requiring replacement of existing software ecosystems. Section 7, Scope and Interpretation. The foregoing description of the invention has been presented for purposes of illustration and description. It is not intended to be exhaustive or to limit the invention to the precise forms disclosed. Modifications, substitutions, and variations will be apparent to those skilled in the art in light of the teachings herein. The scope of the invention is defined by the principles and embodiments disclosed rather than by any particular implementation detail. Features described in connection with specific embodiments may be combined, omitted, or rearranged without departing from the spirit of the invention. Reference to specific shapes, geometries, arrangements, software components, or interaction behaviors is intended to illustrate exemplary embodiments and does not limit the invention to those examples. The invention encompasses all configurations in which non-rectangular display geometries, modular geometric fitting, and geometry-aware operating environment behaviors are employed to reduce cognitive load, improve interaction predictability, and support coherent multi-display arrangements. The invention is not limited to any particular operating system, display technology, input device, or hardware platform. Unless otherwise indicated, terms such as including, comprising, and having are intended to be inclusive rather than exclusive. Singular terms may include plural forms and vice versa, unless the context clearly indicates otherwise. It is therefore intended that the scope of the invention be interpreted broadly, consistent with the disclosure herein and any equivalents thereof. Lad, here are the core claims, extracted cleanly and structured. Stream closing after the patent read. That was the patent. Not a pitch. Not a theory. Not a vibe. Just the record. Everything we talked about tonight, the fatigue, the geometry, the operator loop, the ceilings people keep hitting, that's all embedded in there. In precise language, in constraints, in things that can actually be built. I wanted to read it word for word because ideas only matter once they're forced to stand still long enough to be examined. That's what this is. Not an answer to everything. Not a finished product. But a correction written down on purpose. Next time we'll slow it down. We'll walk through the claims. We'll translate the legal language back into human terms. We'll show how two patents fit together into one system, not as concepts but as mechanisms. Tonight was about proof that this is real. If you stayed through the whole thing, thank you. Not because it was entertaining, but because it mattered. This isn't about working harder. It's about stopping the quiet drain that shouldn't be there in the first place. We'll pick it up next time. Until then, calibrate, don't compensate. Good night, everyone. Bless up always.